This is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of the Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of Shayna Hubers. We'll start with introductions. I'll go with you first. Jeff, how you doing?
Very good. Yeah, glad to be here today. My name is Jeff Pincin, and I'm a licensed counselor in the state of Pennsylvania and Delaware, and I specialize in the treatment of OCD and other related anxiety disorders. And I'm thinking of what I would rather be if I wasn't a counselor. And I know I said before I wanted to be a Methodist minister with an on-again, off-again girlfriend, but I'm thinking maybe I switch, right? So one of the other things in my mind was a lawyer with an on-again, off-again girlfriend. But it turns out that you have to be good at arguing to be a lawyer, and a lot of schooling, and you have to be in a courtroom. So I was like, I don't think I can do that. I'll settle for being a counselor. And here we are, settling.
Plus, there's the whole fidelity thing. You got married. The on-again, off-again girlfriend thing doesn't really work for that.
I mean, I guess I never really thought about that, but all right, you got me.
Just saying.
So, yeah, I had to settle.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah,
tough break.
You got to listen instead of argue.
Maybe I should implement arguing into counseling. Is this
Get some practice.
a good strategy? Yeah.
Just don't implement on-again, off-again girlfriends into...
That could turn out poorly, right?
That could turn out poorly, yes.
Mike, you say it all the time. That was our first direction, right? Like, don't do that.
Don't do that.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I'll move over to you, Mike. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. My name is Mike Smith. I'm a professional counselor in the state of Delaware, also specializing in narrative therapy and geek therapy, and I'm a self-styled expert in all things geek. And if I hadn't become a counselor, I think I really wanted to be a chess master. Like, I love games, and chess was just one of those ones that kind of drew me to it. But then I realized I'm not actually very good at it. You know, I can think a few moves ahead, but just always seemed a little bit too much work to try and become a grandmaster.
So you end up as a counselor.
Yeah.
Ooh, tough break.
Oof. Yeah, it is. I'm no Bobby Fischer, just not.
Was there a movie, was it Searching for Bobby Fischer?
Searching for Bobby Fischer. It was a good movie.
Where he really, so spoiler alert for that movie, he really wanted that Grandmaster certificate.
Yeah.
And I think it was Ben Kingsley that played
I believe so.
he's a great actor,
Oh, yeah.
who played the chess master, and he got all frustrated with him because he wanted a piece of paper.
You just wrote one out here.
You're a
Now
Grandmaster.
you got your piece of paper, your grandmaster. Make your move.
So this is a case that has a lot of moving parts. So I'll hand it over to you, Jeff, to give us kind of an overview of what's going on here in the case of Shayna Hubers and Ryan Poston.
Yeah, sure. So those are the main two players here, right? Shayna Hubers and Ryan Poston. And there are a lot of moving pieces, but the details of the murder are fairly simple. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of action that happened. It was fairly simple. But of course, everything before that was complex because people are complex. And everything after that was there's some humor there, right? Because there's a lot of crazy things that happened. And a lot of complex details there as well. So this is October 12th, 2012. So we have Shayna, and she goes over to Ryan's house unannounced and shoots him. All right, and she says it was in self-defense, and she's the one who calls police and say that she had just killed her boyfriend in self-defense, and you can hear the whole 911 call online. It's pretty easily accessible, and she says it was in self-defense. She claims she had to wrestle the gun from him and shot him as he tried to shoot her or tried to harm her in some way. There was another girlfriend involved that Ryan was going to go see that night. And so it's suspected that Shayna was jealous of that, knew about that, and was jealous of it, and that kind of led to this murder. Prior to that, Ryan and Shayna had kind of an off-again, on-again relationship. Now, he was a lawyer, on-again, off-again girlfriend.
That was your dream position.
I mean, he practically took it from me.
He probably just I know what Jeff's going to do.
Right. I bet you that's what he was thinking.
Probably.
So they're in Kentucky. The murder happened in Kentucky. And so Ryan was supposed to go on this date. Now, the woman he was supposed to go out with was Miss Ohio, I believe. So Shayna, I think, had more of a reason to be jealous because, here's this woman that's known for being attractive, and Ryan's going to go out with her, and so that probably increased the jealousy. So they had a 9:30 date. Ryan never made it to the date. So there was no question that Shayna had did it, of course. She admitted to it. She said she killed him. The question becomes, was it in self-defense? And was there domestic violence going on? And that's really what, there was an initial trial, and then there was a retrial after that, which we'll get into. But there was a heavy focus on if there was domestic violence, if there was a history of that, how Ryan's personality played into that, and how his behavior played into that, and how Shayna's personality and behavior played into that situation as well. So definitely a lot of moving pieces. But in terms of the murder, that's pretty much it. She killed him. She admitted it. It was with Ryan's gun. Ryan was a gun collector, very into guns. Had a lot in the house. Had a lot of bullets sitting around. You could see in the pictures there were just bullets in boxes sitting around there. So she was easily able to access a gun. He was licensed to carry a gun, which I understand a concealed carry permit. I understand he did carry it to work every day, and when he got home, he would set it on his kitchen table. So it was pretty easily accessible to Shayna, and so Shayna was found guilty of murder, and we'll go into the second trial as well. But the trials are probably the interrogation and the trial is probably where the bulk of this case is, the bulk of what we can talk about.
Excellent. I think the interrogation is the bulk of what we'll talk about. It
was a good one.
Crazy.
If you want to call it an interrogation.
Yeah.
That's true.
I don't know whether we can call it an interrogation.
It's a monologue.
Just must be a monologue. That'd be a better word for it. Just, geez. I mean, this case has been talked about as Jodi Arias Part 2. Mm-hmm. Right?
A lot of similarities.
There are a lot of similarities between these two cases.
Yeah.
No multi-level marketing schemes or anything, but
no prepaid legal.
Yeah, no prepaid legal.
Well, he was a lawyer.
He was a lawyer, so he didn't have to sell lawyer legal insurance.
Prepaid legal. I don't know.
Maybe he was the person that Alex, what was his name? Alex,
Travis.
Right? Travis. I'm sorry, yeah. Travis Alexander. Maybe he was the one that Travis was like, oh, well, I know a lawyer. Here's your guy.
Now, Kentucky and Arizona aren't really very close to each other. So
yeah, but it could happen. What if you got somebody in Arizona and Kentucky? It could happen.
It could, I suppose.
So yeah, this case I think does have a lot of frightening parallels, and we'll get to a few of them. It's actually kind of stunning. It almost makes you wonder if she didn't study that case, or at least familiar with it. So this case, as you mentioned, Jeff, starts in Kentucky, and you have Shayna Hubers, born in 1991, and Ryan Poston, a bit older, born in 1982. Mm-hmm. In 2011, they would meet on Facebook.
Yeah, he was tooling around on Facebook, and I think they had a mutual friend, and he saw a picture of hers from when she was at the beach, bathing suit picture, and liked it and sent her a friend request. And that was it.
Yeah, and then the relationship initiated. So Hubers was 19. She was studying psychology at the University of Kentucky and would graduate with her bachelor's degree in 2012, a year after they met. Poston, 28 years old, he had a law degree and worked in Cincinnati, Ohio, even though this was in Kentucky. Yeah. So they're dating. Over the course of about 18 months, they had a rough time. Sounds a lot like what we saw with Jodi Arias. On again, off again, breaking up. You're the worst thing ever. I hate you, blah, blah. Reuniting. You're the best thing ever. I can't live without you. Just back and forth between extremes.
Yeah. The one difference in that, though, that I noticed was that there's a lot less of it from being initiated from Ryan's side. In that there was a lot initiated from Shayna's side. But that wasn't nearly the volume as Jodi and Travis. Right. Jodi and Travis, 13,000 text messages in 2 months. And there'd be a lot of them from name blank. Shayna. Thank you. There'd be a lot of them from Shayna. Not as many from Ryan, but he would still, on occasion, initiate contact again when he thought things had cooled down a little bit, like when she wasn't as passionate.
Passionate. That's a good word.
I'll use the word passionate
at that moment.
Because that's the interesting thing. The language that Ryan tended to use was more legal, more lawyerly. I mean, I think he knew where he needed to keep the line in communication. Unlike Travis, who would have been like, "You're a crazy bird." Mm-hmm. Like, Ryan was like, "Hey, look, we need to cool it.
I think Ryan was much more secure than Travis Alexander. I think Alexander was very conscious of what people consider the attractiveness differential between him and Jodi Arias. Whereas I think a lot of people, including Ryan, probably looked at himself as on par with Shayna. He could replace her with somebody equally as attractive, and ultimately did. So he wasn't as insecure. It was kind of like take it or leave it. One person or another didn't really matter. Whereas I think Travis, for a while anyway, really, I think sexually anyway, was very dependent on Jodi Arias, even though for a love interest in a long term, he wanted other people. He kept chasing other people. So in a way, he was insecure, but another way, Travis was confident in that sense. Right? But he couldn't escape the sex. Doesn't sound like Ryan really cared. He could satisfy that need.
Yeah, and we talked in the Jodi Arias video about the kind of the restrictive nature of the tenets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and how like that alone, that restriction on sex, kind of played a role in Travis's need for that. I don't think Ryan doesn't seem to have had the same kind of restrictive stuff put on him. So I mean, he had more of a freedom there. So it wasn't as necessary in his psyche to try and push those limits.
That's a good point. Yeah. I think another thing that's pretty important here is that they were both very smart, both Shayna and Ryan. Shayna would later say that she had, and it's up on the board there, Einstein-level IQ. But, I mean, that aside, she was smart, as far as I know. His friends would report that, and I think it was verified. Ryan was also very smart. I understand that he triple majored in college, which is super impressive, right? And, of course, he's a lawyer in his 20s. So he's got a lot of good things going for him, too. And it's this happens, of course, but it's amazing that somebody with that level of intelligence would find themselves stuck in a situation like this, right? Where on Ryan's side, that a girlfriend is just obsessed with him, and he's just so put off by it ultimately that he can't stand her. And on Shayna's side, that she is so obsessed with that, and she just can't seem to get away from him, that she just gets it in her mind that she can't live without him, essentially. And so it speaks to intelligence, just book smarts, being a completely separate thing from emotion or whatever else might be going on up there. So it's amazing that somebody can get by and have both sides of that.
Yeah. And Shayna was definitely intelligent. She was, at the time that this happened, she was in grad school.
Right.
She was working on a graduate degree at the time that this happened. Like she'd gotten
be a
in.
School counselor.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She that's really impressive for someone who's just turned 21 to already be in grad school.
Yeah.
Most people who have just turned 21 are still seniors in college if they're in college. So it was really impressive that she got into the grad school. Just showed how intelligent she actually was. But,
yeah, it's interesting how intelligence gets you so far in certain domains. But when it comes to sex and romance and whatever, it's virtually useless.
Yeah.
It's like kryptonite for intelligence.
Intelligence doesn't always help with emotional stuff.
No, but you think though, Ryan, he struck me as kind of a calm, cool, collected, extroverted character. Not somebody again who was like desperate or needy, chasing her, nothing like that. But for whatever reason, he kept taking her back, kept reuniting. It makes little sense, considering his what his personality seems like.
And I've seen that in person, in clients, and in my personal life. I've seen friends who've had relationships like that, where it's like clearly this relationship is toxic. You need to end it and not see each other anymore for both of you to be able to lead healthy lives and just keep coming back together. There's an emotional element to that feeling of connection. When things are good, they're great. When they're bad, they're really bad and toxic. But for some reason, for some people, that really great feeling just always outweighs the toxicity and just brings people back together.
I think a blindness of that toxicity, the goodness always outweighs it.
Right.
Yeah. It's the addiction model. We talked about that before, how everything's an addiction.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, Ryan likes that feeling, the passionate feeling. Hubers, I think, clearly liked that feeling. They were both hooked on that drug. and their intelligence is something they put in the trunk for a while, cool off.
And I'm pretty sure that Shayna would have used this. I don't know if she actually did say this or not, but there's a classic Marilyn Monroe line that would be thrown, or I'm sure would be thrown into any of their arguments. Like, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best, which is just like, okay. It does speak to the duality of personal nature. Yeah, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. But if your worst is 6 days of the week and your best is only one, why would I want that? And I think that Ryan was getting to that point where he was realizing that it's not worth it for me to stay in this relationship. And that's why I think he ultimately was looking for others. He made the date and was getting ready to move on.
I think for him it was probably more just economics. And, it didn't make sense anymore. He could, again, find someone that was as attractive to him somewhere else. So he wasn't particularly connected to her at that point, but she was still very much connected to him. So we see they exchanged 50,000 text messages. And again, mostly Shayna. Yeah. So exchange, maybe not the right word. Fired, maybe closer to it.
One of the I don't know if it's an officer, investigator, but testified at the court hearing that it was a ratio of, during the times when they're breaking up, it was a ratio of 1 to 100. So like for every one that Ryan sent, Shayna would send 100. So like 99, maybe 98% of them were from Shayna, which is an impressive, incredible, crazy number. Like, and that's so difficult to think about, that his phone would just be constantly just blowing up with these things, and he'd be like, I'm not even answering this.
Right. Like he emailed her, he texted her back at one point after she went on a barrage of like 150 or so in a 4-hour period. His only text response was, I'm not even reading these, please stop.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I think that that's a place where we see like the huge difference between this case and Jodi Arias. Like in Jodi Arias, Travis Alexander would not have been able to not respond. Mm-hmm. Like he would have responded, and I think he did respond in many cases, especially with some vitriol and toxicity. And Ryan was just like, just stop. Like I'm not even in this conversation.
That reminds me of Shanna Golyar and how her level of sending messages, and then Dave's level of just not even paying attention. Obviously, very different circumstances, but the level at which Shanna, was it Shanna?
Liz Goyer.
Liz, yeah, Shanna, Liz, or Liz.
Let's not confuse everybody. We got Shayna Hubers. Let's stick with Liz Goyer.
Yeah, yeah, but just the level at which Liz would be able to send so many messages and just be obsessive about it.
Yeah, she did it kind of a few different levels, right? Because she was assuming someone's identity and sending them.
Yeah. There's way more text messages and emails in that case. So you can check that out on the murder part.
Right.
But that one's a crazy case. And I don't say that lightly. But in this case, yeah, most of the text messages are from Shayna, like going over towards Ryan. Mostly when they were in the breakup period. Yeah. Mm-hmm. She kept pushing.
So this brings us to the fateful evening, October 12, 2012. And this, again, in Kentucky, at Ryan Poston's residence. I think it was an apartment, right?
Yeah. Condo, I think.
Yeah, condo?
Yeah, it was either an apartment or a condo.
I'm not sure if there's much of a difference at that point.
It wasn't a townhouse or a house, so it was one of those.
Something where they shared a wall with somebody, or at least they were close enough to somebody.
Probably a floor and a ceiling. And,
yeah, close enough that people could hear what was happening before the shots were fired.
Right. Yeah. So they're together that evening, and we see that Ryan has this date arranged with Audrey Bolt, Miss Ohio, USA, 2012. They were supposed to meet at 9:30. She never arrived. Hubers calls emergency services and said that she killed Ryan, who was his condominium in Highland Heights, Kentucky. Yeah. So, again, straightforward.
Earlier that day, he'd been at work in Cincinnati, and there was another lawyer like in the building. He was right across the hall from him that he spoke with regularly, They were very, they were kind of close as work colleagues. In fact, they played chess with each other.
Oh, there you go.
Could have been you, Mike.
Could have been. I don't know. I'm playing chess with a lot of people. Could have been. But fantasies aside, as he was leaving, their kind of common secretary, I think, like she was, she knew both of them, whether she worked for Ryan or not. She sometimes took messages for him, and she'd taken some from Shayna. And she was a little worried because she'd seen some of the messages that recently, and she knew that he was going out with someone else. He told her it was Miss Ohio he's going out with, and she's like, "You need to be careful, and be careful about Shayna." And he just said, "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." And then he left. Which is, you don't say that if you live in a horror movie. That's right. It's one of the rules. Don't say I'll be back. Don't say I'll be fine. Like, it's one of the rules in Scream.
Right.
Don't go in the basement. Yeah. Don't go in the garage.
Don't go anywhere alone.
Right.
Don't ever say I'll be back, unless you're Arnold Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger can get away with it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in which case it's required.
One of the things I want to just throw out there was we're talking about Kentucky and Ohio, and they obviously share a border, but these two towns, Highland Heights and where he would have worked in Cincinnati, are very close to each other, right? So they different states, of course, but very close to each other. Just something I had to visualize it to wonder, like, why are we talking about different states? But it makes sense once you look at the map; they're so close to each other.
Right, because when you hear Kentucky and Ohio, you think, like, oh my goodness, they're so far apart.
Are they even in the same continent? I don't know.
At least in Delaware, we think that, but that's because, we're a pretty small state. We do have several that are really close by. Like, we have the tri-state area, like Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, or Maryland, mm-hmm. One or the other. Right? So we had like 4 states really quick. You can drive through 3 states in like 5 minutes. Like I can go from, Maryland into Delaware into PA in like 5 minutes on the same road.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? But, living here, we know about those states, but we hear stuff like Kentucky. It's like, wow, that's huge and so far away. And Ohio, wow, it's on the other side of Pennsylvania. Geez. Wait a minute, where is Ohio in relationship to Kentucky? Well, apparently they touch.
The share border. Yep.
Yeah, so this was the setup. Right, so he's there, and he's got this plan, and he's shot and killed with his own gun, which we'll get to. So the police bring Shayna in, and they had this. So we'll talk about this whole interview situation. But
interview is the best word, I think.
So she said a few things that stood out. We'll go through some other things that you guys have, but she said that she referred to Ryan as very vain, which was unusual to say when you just shot and killed somebody. Ostensibly in self-defense.
I think one of the most important things to note here is when they brought her into the interview room, the detective sat down with her and gave her her Miranda rights. Like gave her a sheet of paper that had her Miranda rights on it, read them to her, turned it around, handed it to her, said, "Sign this." She signed it. She said, "You have the right to an attorney. If you want an attorney." She said, "I would like an attorney." He's like, "All right. Well, then we can't ask you any more questions. I'm going to go. Make sure you get your attorney. We'll have another officer come in so you're not sitting here alone. Do you want any cigarettes or anything?" And she was like, "Yeah, I could smoke." And she's like trying to cry. And then there's video and audio of this. Like she's, on the verge of tears. And then the detective walks out, closes the door. Nothing. Like completely shuts off. The other officer comes back into the room. Shayna starts talking. And she doesn't stop.
Mm-hmm. So hours and hours.
Hours. She doesn't stop. Like, that's the most incredible thing. Like she said, "I want a lawyer." And then she didn't wait for the lawyer.
Mm-mm. And the interrogators, they followed the directive. They're like, "All right, we won't ask you any questions." And they didn't. Right. For that entire 2.5 or 3 hours, they didn't ask a single question pertaining to an interrogation.
Right. They asked her if she wanted a Coke or another cigarette or something like that, but they didn't ask her anything pertaining to the case. And in fact, a couple of them, like while they were in there, they got so uncomfortable with how she was just expositing this stuff that they were like, "We don't know that this is ethical to be listening to." Like she keeps going, and they left and told somebody else to go in because like she would just keep talking.
They were worried at that point about being burnt out. Like, they were going to be burnt out by so much information and all the ridiculous stuff that was happening in there. They had to switch out, which, I mean, that's comical.
And she asked for a lawyer. She did the smart thing.
Right. But she forgot phase 2.
Yeah, she forgot phase 2. Shut your mouth.
Lawyer. And so we got to add it, I guess. Always ask for a lawyer and then stop talking.
Right.
That's it.
Right. That's the key. Yeah. It's important to read both sides of the page.
It's like, you have the right to remain silent. Exercise it. Mm-hmm. You have the right to an attorney. Exercise it.
Exactly.
Exercise both of those things. Just say, attorney.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't know if she really hurt herself too much with all the talking. I mean, I would have thought she would have hurt herself a lot with that much talking, but it was mostly bizarre behavior. But the few things, as I mentioned, so the very vain, referring to Ryan's very vain, she said, "I don't know if anyone will marry me if they know I killed my boyfriend self-defense."
I mean, we're all concerned about that at some point, I would think.
Who hasn't said that?
Right. She did ask a question that I swear she took from Jodi Arias. She said, do you get to keep your phone in prison?
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, kind of a lack of insight. She wasn't able to read the room. Then her most famous thing, she said, would have been this part about the nose job. She gave Ryan the nose job that he always wanted.
Yeah. She said, Ryan always wanted a nose job. I gave him the nose job he wanted. Because she shot him right here. And that's what she does. She's like, I shot him right here. Mm-hmm. I guess I gave him the nose job he wanted.
And the officer would say that she was just so, like, couldn't believe that she would say that. You know, like, in this, it wasn't an interrogation, in her statement that was meant to be an interrogation.
And as much as the things that she said to the officers was, you know, it was kind of trying to set her case, trying to set her defense. Like, she was just, it was the things she did when the officers weren't in the room that I think was the biggest issue.
Yeah.
And because she volunteered and the police didn't say anything, they didn't ask her anything, all of that was able to be included in the trial. Like, all of it.
Yeah, as if she was recorded at Walmart or something.
Right.
Like, that's allowed. They didn't ask any question that could have led to a confession or inculpatory type statement at all.
If they had asked even once, like, if they go, so how did you meet Ryan? If they'd said that, like,
it would have
the whole thing would have been gone. But they didn't say anything, except, you want a soda, a soda pop? You want more cigarettes? Like, that's all they asked. And they would say, like, I'm going to step out, somebody else come in. Nothing about the case, which is why this whole video ended up being able to be admitted. And it's the things she did when the officers weren't in the room that I think hurt her the most.
Yeah. Well, at one point she made sort of, well, we can debate it. She said something that could be considered a confession.
Mm-hmm. I tend to take it as a confession.
Yeah. But let's look at the quote. I did it. Yes, I did it. I can't believe I did it. Then added, I'm so good at acting.
This was right after she was singing Amazing Grace.
Right. That was after.
Yeah. After she sang Amazing Grace, she did pirouettes dancing around the room. There is video of this. You can watch this
easily too.
Right? It's easily.
You don't have to dig anywhere. You just first thing you.
It's
you
the
look
first
for.
thing you see. This happened. Like, we're not making this up. This happened. She's pirouetting around. She's singing Amazing Grace. The thing I think that the reason I personally believe that the statement of I did it. Oh, yes, I did it. Because if you listen, she kind of sings it.
Right.
While she's doing a little dance number. The reason I think is because immediately after she says that, when she turns around, she looks and sees the camera. And her whole demeanor changes. She just starts pacing after that. And she stops talking when the officers are out of the room. And she looks at the camera a couple more times. It's like, I think, like, in that moment, she realized, oh, crap.
Shouldn't have said that.
Shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, that didn't help her later on, for sure. So her official story in terms of what happened was that Ryan attacked her and she grabbed his weapon out of his hand and pulled the trigger. She shot him. This really hurt her too, I think. She shot him, but he wasn't dead. But she was certain that either he would die or would have a deformed face And who would want to live with a deformed face? So she shot him several more times.
A total of 6 times.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes down to a deformed face or living, I agree. Who would ever want to live with a deformed face? I mean, I think that's pretty clear choice there.
What are you trying to say about me, Jeff?
I was just looking at you, Mike. That's all I'm saying. But that speaks to what is on her mind, right? What's important to her. I can't possibly have a deformed face. That would be terrible. I can't possibly try to, help him or anything like that. Well, I'm just going to shoot him some more.
It's a mercy killing at this point.
Well, essentially admitting that she had disabled him and then murdered him. So even if it was self-defense, she walked right back into murder. Because once they stop being a threat, you're supposed to stop shooting. Yeah.
People would ask, why she, if she got the gun away from him and shot at him, why didn't she leave the apartment? And Kentucky is like, well, we got a standard ground law. She didn't have to leave. Like, if she thought she was in danger, she could stay in there all day long.
Yeah, I mean, the way she described the attack, you would think that she would have had some injuries, and that what the neighbors heard would have been consistent with her being attacked, and then a struggle, then the gunshots. But it didn't quite pan out that way. There was some different reports.
And there was some evidence following up some of those reports. Like at one point, the investigators said they believed that Ryan disengaged and went into his bedroom and closed the door, and that Shayna picked the lock on the door because moments before she Googled how to pick a lock in the apartment with whatever she had on her. Like, she Googled that and then went into the apartment, or then went into, not the apartment, she went into his bedroom. And like, really? Like, this is the situation where she's supposedly in fear for her life. She is pursuing him so much that he disengages, locks her out of his bedroom. She goes, I'm in such fear for my life that I'm going to pick the lock and go in after him.
That I'm going to pursue him because I'm in danger.
Right. At that point, there's a door between them. She's in no danger at all.
Or at least she doesn't know what danger she might be. If he had a gun, maybe, but she doesn't know that. There's a door there.
Right. He could have a shotgun on the other side of the door, but if she's picking the lock, she's putting herself in the line of fire. She could easily step out of the way at that point. And I think that is one of the things that was damning for her was that, like, she wasn't in danger until, even if she was ultimately involved in if Ryan did physically attack her, and there's very little evidence that happened. But if there was a physical altercation, it would have been because she was the aggressor and pushing with things like that. Like, that kind of evidence shows that she was the aggressor in that situation.
You could even look to the 911 call that she made to begin seeing that her story doesn't quite line up, because the person receiving the 911 call, the dispatcher, would even ask her, you said you got thrown against a couch by him, but you don't have any injuries? And she, well, no, I don't. So you're okay, well, all right, so maybe you won't have any injuries, but you're saying that you got thrown against a couch and that was like a big deal for you, but you're saying you're not hurt at all. And like you said, Dr. Grande, the neighbors didn't hear anything. They were described that they heard her whimpering before the shots were fired. That doesn't sound like a fight. That doesn't sound like an altercation. That doesn't sound like what might happen if a guy was attacking you. You might expect to hear yelling or commotion or something like that, but certainly not whimpering.
And couches tend to be padded. I don't know, my couch is. It's not greatly padded at this point, but it still has some padding on it. But the one thing she also like, it changed, like what she got thrown up against changed as well. Because at one point she said she got thrown up against the bookshelf. And the only the bookshelf she indicated, like, has, like, one of the shelves had a bunch of books, had a pistol on it, and a row of about 15 bullets, all standing upright. And
Undisturbed,
completely undisturbed. Like, if you have any experience with lining up bullets, for any reason, you know that if you look at them funny, they'll fall over and start rolling around.
By design, their weight is evenly distributed, right? So it's not like they're bottom heavy and they're just going to sit
They're
there.
actually a
if they
little
get-
top heavy.
They're actually a little
Cartridge,
top heavy because
the bullet part of the cartridge is
if we see our little thing here,
We can
there's
demonstrate.
powder in the bottom of this and a lead tip at the top. Like the lead weighs more than that, so they're top heavy and they'll clunk over real quick, real easily. But when investigators took pictures in the aftermath, they were all still standing straight. Like either they were all just display pieces glued into place, which they weren't because that was checked, or nothing was ever pushed up against that. Like there was no slam up against that bookshelf. And in fact, some of the dust on one of the higher shelves wasn't even disturbed at all.
yeah. So she boxed herself in a bit with her statements. Would have been better just to say nothing.
The whole time.
Yeah,
The whole-
really,
all
yeah.
throughout.
nothing she said helped her.
Yeah. No,
So-
and much of what she said hurt her.
Yeah, in these cases where there's just one person kills another and they say self-defense, juries often do like to hear from the person to say what happened because they're the only person who can. And sometimes they, I think, weigh against a defendant who doesn't do that, even though you have the right to not speak. So, maybe she would have testified or whatever, but I mean, all those statements beforehand, they hurt her.
We talked about some of the neighbors and the sounds they heard, and Shayna said that she shot him once and then like moved around and shot him again after careful deliberation. But one of the couples who lived, I think it was the ones who lived below, it's an older couple. They both of them described the pattern of shots as bang, 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 bang. There were 6 shots. So it was 2, then a pause, and then 4 more, like in rapid succession. So it wasn't I shot him once. Oh, he's going to be deformed. I'm going to have to do something.
Oh, he's twitching. I
Oh, he's
think it
twitching.
said, yeah.
He's going to keep coming after me, which is, again, one of the things she said as well. That he twitched and she thought that he was coming, so she shot him again. But
One of the odd things was that Shayna's mom would so there was about 10 minutes from the time that she shot him to the time that she called 911. The first person she called was her mom, who she had seen earlier that day, and Shayna had been complaining of chest pains, and she had claimed to Ryan that she had went to the emergency room, started describing the medicine she was on, and essentially it seemed trying to get some kind of sympathy from him. But it turns out she never went there. She was just shopping with her mom the whole day. So she calls her mom, and mom says, "You need to call 911 and just tell them what happened." And so it's a strange thing, right? I mean, I get it that in a situation like that, you just shot someone, you're not really going to know what to do necessarily. It's not a situation a lot of us are in at any point. But it is strange, of course, to call your mom first, I would think, right? I mean, but strange behavior doesn't mean that, whatever.
Doesn't
but-
mean she's guilty. Yeah.
Right. But it would indicate to me that maybe she's trying to get something from her mom. I don't know, sympathy or some kind of tell me what to do here, tell me how to get out of this. And it seems to me that her mom would kind of be somebody who would help her through this and try to help her get away with it. Not get away, but always be on her side.
Right. Maybe
Even
she's
though-
looking for somebody to bring a shovel and some trash bags out, a chainsaw.
Yeah. And, she, to this day, believes that Shayna didn't do anything wrong, that it was in self-defense, or her mom does. So it seems like she was just perhaps just enabling the behavior.
Well, we remember the case, was it Kristen Smart? Now, there's no conviction in that case at the time of making this video, but there was a young man, a suspect, now soon to be a defendant, who called his father, allegedly when he murdered a young woman.
Right.
And it appears, again, allegedly the father did kind of, get the proverbial trash bags and shovel and come on out.
Yeah.
So sometimes I guess the parents help and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. You might mention that they went out shopping because one of the witnesses that would actually testify against her was I think she was one of the sales clerks in the mall that they were at, who testified that she heard Shayna telling another clerk at the mall that she was going to kill her boyfriend just a few hours before she actually did kill her boyfriend, which was one of the points of premeditation that the prosecution brought up. And yeah, her mom to this day says Shayna is not a murderer.
Shayna would text the same thing to a friend. Her and Ryan were at a shooting range and said, hey, I want to just turn around and shoot him and pretend like it was an accident.
Right. I think that was like the weekend before
a few days
they went to the shooting range.
Right.
And yeah, she said, it was like, oh, I'll shoot him and make it look like an accident.
So we see a pattern, and evidence, no less, of that premeditation.
And an indication, given that she was at least well versed enough in firearms to know what she was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the structure of what happened to her here. So obviously she was charged with murder, indicted, and faced trial. She couldn't make bail. It was $5 million. Didn't have that lying around. So
pocket change, as far as I'm concerned.
Her mom didn't have the bail fund just sitting waiting.
So another area where she didn't help.
All right.
So this case ended up with 2 trials, and you see a fairly similar strategy from one to the next, although it changed up a little. The prosecution argued that Ryan was trying to leave the relationship. That's why he was killed by Hubers.
Yeah.
The defense said that Hubers was a victim of domestic violence, and all the other evidence kind of supports those 2 narratives that they pull in. So we see that there was evidence presented at the trial that Ryan was afraid of Hubers. So they established that he had done some things, like not tell her about his date with Audrey Bolt. Mm-hmm. A former cellmate. Now, I don't like these former cellmate or current cellmate different, these statements, because I feel like they're so unreliable.
They tend to be.
Yeah.
But they tend to be usually because prosecutors are offering something in return, and it's kind of like, okay, there's a deal for this. Yeah. There's actually 3 different women from the prison that Shayna was being held in came forward to testify, and they all kind of had the same stories.
Yeah, we see that Hubers laughed about shooting Poston, and she said she was too smart to get convicted because she had the IQ of Albert Einstein, which I believe is estimated, because he's actually off the traditional scale for the Weiss. So I think it's estimated at 200, and the scale stops at something like 155 to 165, depending on the version of the test.
The Weiss, by the way, is the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, which is the gold standard.
Yeah, it is, yeah. The Stanford Binet also pretty good for people at the extremes. So if you're really low or high in intelligence, I go Stanford Binet. But for everyone else, the Weiss is an excellent instrument for IQ.
And because it has a mean score of 100 and a maximum score of 145. That's 3 standard deviations.
So depending on the version, right? So yeah, it has. I think it goes from 155. I think it goes from 155 to 160 or 65, depending on the version. It can. I don't think it's really necessarily reliable or valid up that high. It works. Yeah,
because you're more than 3 standard deviations above the mean at that point. That's really into outlier territory.
I interpret the scores. I think of the scores as from 70 to 130. It's pretty solid. It's 2 standard deviations each way. If someone says that they're 140, another person says they're 150, I don't know if there's any real difference there. Like it's not as good at the extremes. Like the Stanford Binet would be a little better there.
The ones I laugh at are people like, I have an IQ of 230.
Yep. Or I've heard this 6,000, 150,000.
It's like, wait, are you talking about the Mensa test? That's not the Weiss. It's not the Stanford Binet. It's not one of the scientifically, backed intelligence surveys.
I can't tell you how many times I've run into people in my life who've given me IQ numbers. Like they just say their IQ, or their alleged IQ. And I really have to just not laugh. Like it's everything I have just to keep the laughter inside. Because, I've never heard of the test. Like I haven't administered the test before. Like they're like, oh yeah, I scored 180. That's pretty amazing considering the test doesn't go that high.
Like which test?
Did you put 2 together? Like
it's like I have asked people. I have an IQ of 175. I'm like, on which test? And they can't even name the test. They're just like, oh, I took it. Like, okay, was this an online thing? Is this one of those ones where you like you click the same question over and over and over and over again? Like it's 2 or 3 different questions and your IQ is based on how long it takes you to figure out that it's just the same questions recycled. Like when you finally just click like done and it goes, oh, your IQ is 175 because you figured this out in less than 5 minutes. That's not a valid or reliable test.
The other reason I'm so suspicious is because when you ask them like where they took the test, it's always like, oh, I can't really remember. When I was a kid, it was some special class. I took a test. It doesn't work that way. Very few people actually get an IQ test administered from a licensed professional. It's expensive. It's like $400 to $700 depending on who you go to. So, where people do get them would be sometimes if they're in trouble with the law, they're administered. Sometimes if they go to a mental health facility. There's not many other situations where you get a full-scale IQ. Not a whole lot. Some job placement assistance sometimes funded by the state, but it's just who's going to spend that kind of money, and then they're not going to remember, like
right? Who's going to spend that kind of money for testing a child who will likely test differently later? Especially given the biases that kind of have historically been built into IQ tests that kind of rely on knowledge rather than problem-solving ability.
Yeah, the most believable would be if someone was in school and had trouble, they might get tested. But again, they'll remember. And it's probably a Stanford Binet when you're young.
And more likely, they'd be tested for something like ADHD prior to the intelligence test. Because that's going to be a more reliable finding.
Yeah.
I imagine it's the kind of thing that you hear on the playgrounds, like during recess in 3rd grade, like, oh, my IQ is 1 million. Well, I have 1 million friends. Well, I have 2 million friends. I have 2 billion toys. I win. They're on the same scale as intelligence and toys and friends. It's all the same.
My intelligence is infinity. Yeah, well, my intelligence is infinity plus 1.
Infinity squared, or raised to the power of infinity.
My parents are better than your parents.
My dad can beat up your dad.
Exactly. I'm pretty sure at that point it's the same thing. That like, I don't care what my intelligence is. I just want to beat somebody else at this point.
But there is a thing, like when we get into adulthood, if you start bragging about your intelligence level, people just are like, oh my goodness.
It shows a lack of insight. Yeah.
So somebody goes, I have an IQ of 147. People are like, oh God, he thinks he's smarter than me. Right.
Yeah.
And it's not about like, I don't even know what my IQ is.
When I told people when I administered IQ test or would get results from another test is never tell anybody. Never tell anybody, because there's no way that ends well.
Yeah.
No matter where it is, low, high, just forget it. Because it's an important number, but it's not critical. So you know it and you move on.
You're not going to make friends that way. Mm-mm. Nobody's going to be super impressed and think you're the coolest person in the world. No. If they could even interpret it.
Yeah, because most people don't have the kind of knowledge that assessors or counselors have in those kinds of assessments. So they're just like, it's a number. The higher the number, apparently, the more impressive it is. But wow, they really memorized that number, so they're really full of themselves.
I think the number is also disappointing because of what the media has. Like, the cops will be in the smoke-filled room, like, this master criminal has an IQ of 160. Again, off the scale for some tests. So if you have an IQ of 115, that's really impressive. 84th percentile. And yet, most people will be afraid to say that because they'll think, oh, that's diminutive compared to 160.
Right. But we got to remember, one of the most successful criminals, arguably in history, supposedly had an IQ of 70. Gary Ridgway.
Gary Ridgway, yeah.
Killed, upwards of, we know 45. Most estimates like 70-some. IQ of 70, according to tests. This is the criminal mastermind, because he got away with it for years.
Right. Yeah, one of the most effective serial killers in history.
Yeah. So like the criminal mastermind with the IQ off the scale, I find that the smarter the person is, the more overcomplicated they make things, and then they get caught faster.
Yeah, I don't know if IQ helps in getting away with crime.
It often doesn't help people in school People that are sometimes just, they do so well in school that they just don't even try, right? It's not a challenge for them, so they just slack off. They could do it in an instant, but they just slack off.
School performance is much more about motivation than intelligence.
Yeah.
Now, as far as my own intelligence goes, I found that my intelligence has led me to not be convicted of any crimes ever. Mainly because my intelligence has driven me to not commit crimes.
Well, listen, Mike, there's still time. Right?
I am, despite the gray in the beard, I am fairly young. I could do a life of crime from here on. I might decide to become the next Sopranos. You never
Start
know.
planning. I mean,
Well, we have that cult leader thing on the back burner.
Yeah, we do.
there you go. There you go.
We could
Retirement
bust it
plan.
out. Retirement plan. Become a cult leader. Order some murders. Here or there.
You didn't have any interest in a 401k. You just wanted to be a cult leader.
I just want the 12 Rolls Royces and the ability to tell people, go kill that person. With just a nod. I'm not say it verbally. Just look at the person, look at another person, and then walk away and know that it'll be handled.
Yeah. That's a level of effectiveness that's just, I mean, that's great.
That's my criminal genius plot. Or I'll just spend the rest of my life not committing crimes.
So we see here that despite having an IQ comparable to Einstein, Shayna was found guilty on April 23, 2015, the first time. Mm-hmm. Jury recommended 40 years. The judge agreed. Yeah, but she was eligible for parole after 20. So, okay, that's, for first-degree murder, that actually seems like a very good sentence for her. She's young. The full freight is 40. That's not 25 to life, 35 to life, 40 to life. It's 40, which means at 40 years, she has to be released.
Right.
With a good time, I don't know what it is in Kentucky, but I'm sure it's something like 10 or 15%. She can edge off. But she's eligible for parole after just 20.
Yeah.
One of the things that they that the defense tried to get put in there was, I think it was 7 or 8 years, but they were saying that there was a law in Kentucky that a victim of domestic violence could get out of prison after 7 or 8 years, I think, but the judge wasn't going for that. The judge didn't believe that there was domestic violence in the relationship.
Right. There was an exception, and a lot of states have this now, where you can get a reduced, you get more favorable options for release date if you were the victim.
The major difficulty that they had in getting that was proving that they were domestic partners. Right. Kentucky had some very, very clear laws when it comes to that kind of thing. Like people often asked, why didn't Ryan get a restraining order if he was scared of her like this? And because in the state of Kentucky, you can't unless you're married or are living together.
Which Ryan, of course, knew, being an attorney. Now, he was an attorney in Ohio, but I'm sure he knew Kentucky law, too.
Right. He knew that enough, and I think he mentioned that to some people before. He's like, I can't get a thing because we don't live together. Right. Like, you have to be living together for a certain period of time. You have to be considered domestic partners before you can get a restraining order. And that was the same problem that Shayna's defense attorneys had with the whole domestic partner thing. They had Shayna saying, yes, we were domestic partners. We were living together. We were that close. We were together. But then the prosecutor was like, really? Then how come you slept with 12 other guys in
2012?
In 2012. Like that's one a month. You were with those other men in their apartments, but you weren't living there and you had your own place. Why, how, and the judge ultimately was like, I don't think that they were domestic partners. Like, given that there was the makeup breakup stuff and that she was seeing other people. And he's just like, you guys were not domestic partners. So no, like you don't fit into the definition of this.
The defense would reference things like she was doing his laundry. She was grocery shopping for him or buying stuff for him, walking his dog. Okay. It's reasonable to think, okay, if you're doing all those things, you're spending a lot of time at his place. Okay. But then you throw in, you were with a lot of other guys that year. And Shayna tried to say, well, what do you mean by with? And they're like, all right, let me spell it out for you. Were you sleeping with these guys? Well, yeah, but I mean, when you say with, and they're like, listen, you can't have both, right? You
she-
got to draw a line here somewhere.
They had to get down to like the actual question. You had sexual intercourse with these men, did you not? And she was like, well, yes.
But
But I wasn't with them. Like, was it multiple times with each man? Well, yeah, there were multiple times with each guy, but I wasn't living with them. Like, yeah, but you weren't living with Ryan either. That's the point.
she packed a lot of stuff into 2012. Like there was a lot that happened there.
There was a lot that happened in 2012, but that was like the 18 months, and then like seven or 8 months in 2012 was they were mostly broken up, back together here or there for a short periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's where she is at this point, right? 40 years, eligible for parole, and 20. I think given what she did, it was an incredible gift.
Yeah. I was very surprised to hear 40 years.
Yeah.
And
At that point.
That was 2015, so it's 3 years after the murder, or 2.5 years after the murder.
Right. Yeah, so she could have been out around 40 years old, something like that. So then we see that one of the jurors was a convicted felon.
Yeah, and in Kentucky, that means he's not eligible to serve on a jury, but did not disclose that during the voir dire, during the jury selection period.
And who would ever think to check?
Right?
The details of someone.
But apparently, the when it came out, the defense was like, "There's a big no-no," and the judge agreed. The judge was like, "Yeah, that's not cool." So she was ordered to have another trial, and that took place in 2018.
Yeah, so here we see prosecution brings basically the same strategy. The defense shifted a little bit, although they're really essentially arguing the same thing, which is Ryan's abusive. Here we see kind of a thorough analysis of their sexual relationship. That's what the defense really wanted to talk about, was sex. This sounds familiar.
It does, very much so. Jodi Arias? Could it be? What is important is there is a distinct pivot in their strategy. As in the first trial, the strategy was Ryan attacked her on October 12th. He went after her. He threw her around, picked her up, and threw her against the couch and threw her up against the thing. She was in fear for her life then, and she grabbed the gun and shot him. During the second trial, the strategy was more battered woman syndrome kind of thing. Like he had been, systematically abusing her for so long that she felt that she could only get out of the relationship if she killed him.
Yeah, it was more of a cumulative type of feel to it. Like it was building up, volcano, and exploded rather than in the moment. But this required some testimony, right, to establish the nature of the relationship. And here we see Shayna's not shy about the details.
Yeah.
Again, seems familiar.
There's a playbook she's running out of.
Yeah, she said that reaching orgasm with Ryan was difficult, and she was mad about it. That was one part. She said that Ryan liked kinky sex and sometimes took things too far. So again, a lot of similarities. And she said that Ryan wanted to lose weight and undergo breast augmentation surgery. So again, he was controlling, manipulative, pushy with sex, rough, all these things. So Travis Alexander comes to mind once again.
It's interesting that the surgery, the corrective or plastic surgery goes from Ryan wanting to have a nose job to Ryan wanting to have a boob job and lose weight.
Yeah, I think she kind of shifted a little bit in terms of the focus. Now, there was also a mental health argument. Shayna had PTSD and substance use problems.
And borderline personality disorder.
And borderline, which was the argument we saw in child Jodi Arias. Not the substance use, I don't know about the PTSD, but the borderline.
Right. They would also say that she was sexually abused as a child, would come up, but there's no police reports to back that up. There's nothing they could point to that was evidence of that. So it seemed like just another thing where they were grabbing for whatever they could find.
And to be fair, that is often the case.
You're right.
I've had clients who were sexually abused as a child. They never said anything to anyone until they became adults because their abuser told them not to.
Right.
Or they felt shame. And and guilt for letting it happen. And you know, when a 30-year-old person finally breaks down and tells their parents that their uncle was the one who did something to them when they were 5 years old, and the parents don't believe them because it's been 25 years, you haven't said anything. And then the parents think back and be like, oh God, like there's clues there.
Yeah.
Like it happens all the time. And there's never any like police reports from that because nobody said anything.
Well, it's part of the manipulation, the control.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that there would be no police reports,
Sure.
but it rings hollow from Shayna after all of these other things. Why wasn't this brought up at the first trial?
Right.
Well, the jury would never know that in the second trial, but as outside observers, we can say that. Like, wait a second, you never brought that up.
Yeah.
If it was so important, why didn't you? So let's take a look at the borderline personality disorder, because this is an interesting defense. Now, again, if she had it, she had it, but to use it for the defense is what she chose to do, like to kind of play the BPD. So this is a disorder that is associated with some violence inside relationships.
Right.
It has frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, unstable relationship pattern, impulsivity, paranoia. It's a disorder where you see a lot of breaking up and reuniting, which is what characterized this relationship.
Right. The intensity of that. And they would say that she was, because she had the borderline, she would react intensely to situations, and it was kind of, sending the message of, well, it's not her fault. She has borderline, so she's going to react intensely and she's going to do all these things. So you should, gotta give her some sympathy here. You should understand that she was just doing what she knows to do.
And there are certain areas in mental health where I will say this disorder does warrant mitigating circumstance, like schizophrenia and delusion, hallucinations. If a person's in an active delusional and hallucinatory state and they're literally seeing a person as an alien lizard humanoid and are terrified, that could count as self-defense if they ended up fighting back against the alien lizard humanoid that they're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case with borderline. We don't have that kind of disconnect from reality.
Yeah.
And so there is a responsibility for the person to manage their mental health.
For most crimes, including homicide, including this homicide, right, which she was being charged with, which was, I believe, was first degree. First or second degree?
First,
yeah. It requires mens rea, right, a criminal state of mind. So intent, right? It couldn't be accidental, like she reached down and grabbed the gun and somehow pulled the trigger or whatever. There's no mens rea. Borderline doesn't absolve her of intent. I mean, you're still going to have intent. Where schizophrenia, psychosis could.
Yeah.
Mens rea could be gone.
And that was kind of what the defense was arguing with the mental health stuff. They weren't trying to say, oh, Shane is not guilty because of this. They were trying to say, because of this factor, the PTSD factor, all of these things, she was so emotionally charged that she didn't premeditate anything. So can we go with a manslaughter plea or manslaughter? Like they were trying to get the jury to consider going with the lesser charge, because the lesser charge would have a much lower threshold of sentence. And given that this was like she was sentenced because she didn't have bail, she spent 3 years in jail waiting for trial. And it's 3 years later, she could have potentially walked out with the day that they got the verdict if they said manslaughter. They said guilty of manslaughter, 6 years. Well, she's already served 6 years. She's got that time served. So she could have potentially walked out. I think that's what the defense was really hoping for. Mm-hmm. As in they could have gotten her out right then.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Well, it was just trying to make things murky. Like what happened in that apartment, that condominium? Did Ryan contribute in some way, which activated the borderline? And then she overreacted, but not to a second degree or first degree murder. It's tough. It's a tough sell. When one person's shot dead and the other person's holding the gun, I don't know.
It was such a tough sell that the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder.
They sure did.
One of the things that that came up as well was kind of Ryan, how Ryan contributed to some of the things that happened. Now, of course, he was the one who was killed, and nobody should be killed, right, over anything. But he had a problem with anger, right? He did throw Shayna out of his condo at some point. The neighbors had confirmed that. Shayna talked to them about it at that point.
And by throw, we literally picked her up
Right.
and took her to the door and threw her out the door.
Right.
You got to clarify that, because there's a lot of ways of throwing someone out of your apartment.
Not just a push.
Figuratively, when I was like, get out now. I just threw me out of the apartment. No, he picked her up and tossed her out.
Yeah.
Of course, he'd been trying to get her to leave the apartment for several hours.
Threw her purse out, I think, first, and then threw her out.
Yeah, he'd been trying to get her to leave peacefully without anything for hours at that point, and just got fed up with it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's when he picked her up and put her out.
Yeah, and so there was a lot of text messages that were referenced, at both trials. But there's one that Ryan had written that he wanted to blow up the whole earth. He wanted to, use dynamite. I don't know what he said, but wanted to blow up the whole earth. And so it's important to note here that he was facing a lawsuit from a former law partner. Okay, so he's stressed from that. Of course, he's got Shayna that is just doing everything she can to make his life pretty difficult. And there's a toxicologist that testified that he was on Adderall and Xanax. So he would take the Adderall to stay awake, Xanax to calm himself down, go to sleep. And so this toxicologist said that the combination, to quote him, that these drugs would basically cause incidents of behavioral discontrol and hostile outbursts. So I think that they found the right person to testify. That's for sure. At least the defense did, because that's somebody who would say, "Oh, this guy's got a huge anger problem, and these medications that you're on to contribute to that, and the lawsuit that he was facing, and just all the stress that he was under. He just snapped, right? So he's the problem." And so, of course, the judge didn't buy it. The jury didn't buy it. But Ryan, he had his own things he was working through, and Shayna didn't help that at all, right, with her behavior.
Right. He did have the tweets and text messages about, I just want to blow up the world. Some fairly generic violent imagery. It wasn't really like, I'm going to go take an AK-47 down to my ex-law partner's office, and I'm going to walk in there and just unload and kill 5 people. Like, it was just like, I'm so frustrated. I just want to blow up in general.
Right.
And I think that's what the jury read into it, into those particular texts, because of all the stress that he was under. And yeah, maybe he had these substances influencing his behaviors, but when they get into the text messages and his text responses to Shayna, they seemed pretty calm.
Yeah.
All things considered.
Right.
Like even that day when she was texting him about, having been in the hospital and all this stuff that's going on, and she sent like the 100 text messages in less than 2 hours. His response was so calm.
Yeah.
Was, I'm not even reading these texts. Please stop.
Yeah, so they're going through every detail in his life, trying to pick out what would support this defense.
Right.
Which is, again, something we saw with Jodi Arias. Mm-hmm. Every bad thing Travis did was highlighted a few times.
Now, fortunately, there was no sex tape of Ryan and Shayna, the way there was in the Jodi Arias thing.
Right.
And I say fortunately, just for his family not having to listen to that, like the way Travis's family had to.
Yeah, the testimony, yeah. Yeah, and the recording, that was tough. So we see here that, I found this interesting. So PTSD, borderline, substance use, that was the defense. Right? The prosecution, doesn't surprise me, said, you know what, we only see borderline. I don't know if they comment on the substance, but they didn't see the PTSD. Which, we've talked about this, how these different experts come down on so predictable. I'm really surprised that the defense came up with borderline. Usually the defense would come up with schizophrenia or major mood disorder with psychosis, not a personality disorder.
Where I'm surprised that the prosecution didn't counter the borderline with antisocial
Or narcissistic.
or narcissistic or something like that. But there's been a line of thought from some clinicians that borderline is an extreme expression of early childhood PTSD. That the early life trauma is almost ubiquitous with borderline, and so the borderline forms because of maladaptive PTSD reactions that become ingrained in the person's personality. So, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm in that camp, as I just try and deal with whatever's the most problematic thing right now is the thing we should deal with. For some people, that would be dealing with the borderline and the relationship issues and things. Others might be deal with the trauma past.
Yep.
But
how trauma integrates into personality functioning in cluster B is really a mystery, because a lot of people with borderline don't have any trauma history. So it kind of throws things off. Now, most, I think, do. I believe it is most, over 50% do. So you think, okay, that could be etiological. But what about those who have no trauma? Is it maybe we've defined trauma incorrectly. Maybe other things can be traumatic, but same thing, you would think that whatever the etiological components were for borderline, there'd be some shared variables for antisocial and narcissistic and histrionic, yet we don't see that either. So is borderline even a personality disorder? Or should it be in cluster B as its own element? I've always thought of borderline as really overlapping a lot with vulnerable narcissism. Somebody's insecure, vindictive, a lot of shame, and still self-centeredness and sense of entitlement and all that. So, but again, some people with borderline are not narcissistic, even though there's a huge overlap for many. Right. There's still exceptions. So it's a difficult construct. Mm-hmm. I've heard other researchers say that borderline is a feminine expression of antisocial. That was popular for a while.
I've heard that before too. As I've heard some of the statistics indicate 98% of people with borderline are female. Like it doesn't express in males very often.
Yeah, but other statistics show 50-50.
Yeah, others show 50-50. Other the one article I read that really went with the 98% is we got 98% of borderline are women. 98% of antisocial are men. They're just the same thing, just in gender expression. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't see that at all.
No, I think they're latching on too much to the criminality. Both do have an association with criminality.
On a different, slightly different tangent note, I intensely dislike the name borderline, just because of
its origin, right?
Just because of the origin of it, the history of it, because it was, they looked at as female, mm-hmm. as someone who was on the borderline between psychotic and hysterical, which hysterical was always a female-only diagnosis because the hystar refers to the uterus, mm-hmm. which is where the word hysterical comes from. So it was always it's your hysterical or psychotic, or right in the middle, right in the borderline. And where we have changed, terminology to reflect a difference, like histrionic disorder instead of hysterical disorder.
Although histrionic has a strong origin in that.
It does, but it also has some other slightly different connotations because it's not spelled with a Y. Mm-hmm. It has a slightly different word origin. But we also don't use psychotic anymore either. I mean, you use psychotic features and other things, but it's not like the diagnosis is not you're psychotic.
Right. There's no psychosis diagnostic classification.
But yet we still use borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, some conceptualizations have borderline as on the border from neurosis to psychosis too. So it's it's almost like you're on your way to psychotic, but you're not quite there. It's like the behavior is the same, but no delusion, no hallucination. But everything else looks like psychosis. It's how they picture it. But yeah, it's poorly conceptualized. The problem is we don't have a good alternative. And there's talk about dropping histrionic, which is going to push more people into borderline because there's a huge overlap between those.
Yeah, there is.
it's we always have these debates about people who look at the DSM and are like, I'm following it to the T. Other people are like, I never make a diagnosis unless I have to, and so still other people are like, I take it with a grain of salt, not everyone's going to look the same who's borderline, not everyone's going to look the same who's whatever, and so it's a tough place to be, to kind of find your voice in that as a therapist or as a professional who can diagnose, and it probably makes it even more difficult for people in a court situation, because the lawyers and court officials or court people and everything, they're going to use whatever they can to paint a certain picture, and they're going to present it in a certain way, and they have the great potential of twisting things to fit their needs, right? So you could do that as a professional who can diagnose and say, well, yeah, I see this in this person for these reasons. The other person comes in, the other professional comes in and say, well, I see this for these reasons, and they're completely different. Mm-hmm. You see that all the time. So it's one of those things that when we read about it, we read about a diagnosis that was given of somebody, being charged with something, where, it's presented as fact. Like, this is what it is, and and no one can dispute it because I'm a professional and this is the diagnosis I give. Well, it's ironic that what you gave helps the defense, but it's ironic that what they gave helps the prosecution. So who am I to believe here? And does what you say carry any weight? Does it have any merit at all? And sometimes maybe it doesn't. So then we're stuck here as people looking in from the outside, wondering, does it really mean anything when they say you're borderline, and what does that do for your case?
Yeah, I don't think it means anything. I think facts got buried somewhere in the backyard. Most of these mental health professionals who testify, because they're interviewed by the defense of the prosecution. Mm-hmm. There's a discussion beforehand, and I think there's kind of a not so informal agreement that you're going to find something that helps our team. Mm-hmm. Every now and then you'll see a clinician who flips over in the middle of trial. Very rarely, and for that matter, other forensic testimony, like gunshot residue people, whatever, sometimes flip over, but not often. No. Not often. Usually, you're on one team and you stay with that team.
I think when courts go into the having expert testimony in mental health disorders that come in, they're really counting on the emotional reaction of the jury to mental health stuff. They're counting on the stigma to either have people who are so pro mental health stuff that they go, oh, it's a mental health issue. They weren't in control. They couldn't help themselves. Not guilty. Or the other side of things, which is probably far more prevalent, like, oh, there's a mental health issue, lock her up.
They definitely did it.
Like, they definitely did it. They're crazy. Like, there's definitely a stigma on that. And, there are some people who want to overcompensate for that. They hear mental health stuff. Their first reaction is, oh, they must have done it because they're crazy. Oh, no, wait, I shouldn't be thinking that way. I've got to go with not guilty because that my guilty verdict is completely, wrapped up in this craziness thing, them being crazy. And I think that's that's for in courts. Mm-hmm. I mean, quite frankly, I don't think the courts should be having much to do with mental health in the first place.
Well, I think it's scary that counselors and other professionals are in court, but then I think it would be scarier without them, because then all the compassion is removed and it's all legal. I don't know. I'm actually pretty torn. I'm alarmed, though, at the lack of flexible thinking. That's my major criticism of the experts. We've seen cases that amaze me where, like, somebody will, they'll pick a team. They'll be like, oh, yeah, this person has depression or they have whatever. And then they'll go to court and they'll play, like, surveillance video, where the person's saying, I'm malingering. I just beat that clinician. I beat him in his own game. I don't have any symptoms of depression. I just pretended I do. Now, somebody could lie about that. Somebody could lie about malingering. But then you see other evidence, right? They just keep producing it. And the professional is like, no, they're still depressed. Or do you have any doubt? No doubt. None? Really? No doubt? When somebody says they're not depressed, that would at least generate some doubt. But they're married to whatever that opinion was they initially brought in. And they rarely want to admit that they're wrong. And this criticism would extend to every professional who testifies in trials. All of them do that. Fingerprint experts, DNA, they never want to admit any weakness because they're afraid they'll get exploited and they'll lose their ground. But they could just also tell the truth. That's how I look at it, right? They can just tell the truth.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, that destroys my DNA testimony, or that damages it, but I still stand by it, or whatever. But it's always, no, that's absolutely wrong. That person's, it's a 1 in a billion chance.
Well, that's the expert bias, right? Like the two sides of expert bias are when the jury accepting, oh, this is an expert, so they know exactly what they're talking about, so they must be the authority on thing. And the other side is from the expert side, going, I am the expert, I know everything. Don't challenge me on anything. So if the expert is suddenly challenged, oh my goodness, they have to defend their stance. And I think for many counselors, I know for me, I always went with the old Rogerian idea that there's always two experts in the room. I may be an expert in relationships and psychology and counseling techniques and things like that, but my client is the expert in themselves. They lived their life. So I try and mitigate any kind of expertise bias that I have by knowing that this client knows more about their situation and themselves than I do.
What I would like to see is, like, maybe there's a way that a professional can come in and try to just confuse everyone. Come in and be like, you know what? I've I've interviewed this person, I've done assessments, and I've come to find out that they suffer from restless leg syndrome. And be like, oh yeah, that sounds like, yeah, you're right, they probably did it because of their restless legs. Or they come in and you have a sleep disorder or something. You know what? You're right, they did commit that. They have a mental health thing. They did commit that murder. And like, why don't you throw these in there and just confuse someone? Change it up.
There's no possible way that this client could have, this defendant could have committed this murder because they have irritable bowel syndrome.
And you never hear those ones,
there would have been flatulence everywhere.
Exactly. And I'm sure they could pick it apart like that. Well, yeah, you're right. They would have seen their legs shaking in the video of the murder, but they didn't. Oh, they must be lying, and they must, so like, why don't you just go for something different at this point? It might have the same outcome, and nobody will see it coming. I think that's probably the way to go.
I think you're gonna have a bunch of defense attorneys owing you a lot for that, because if anybody sees this, they're gonna start doing that. Just be like, let's get a random expert.
This is not free legal advice. Like, I'm charging for this at this point. You're right, Mike.
Right. Yeah. They'd be like, what's the foundation for this? Flatulence. They would have smelled things. The investigators would have smelled the flatulence left over. There was no smell, so therefore couldn't have been this person.
And then you could have an expert come in with a smell-o-meter or something. Like, oh, I tested the air with my smell meter, and I didn't find anything. And I think you just made that smell meter up. No, it's scientific, I promise. It's
scientific. It's been tested many times.
You're anti-science if you don't believe it.
There you go. See, this could go a number of different ways. I don't know why anybody isn't doing this.
We shouldn't joke about the anti-science thing because it's all too real.
Yeah, you're right.
All too real.
You're right.
Especially we should do an episode of Alien Lizard Humanoids on the anti-vaxxer movement.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Goodness gracious.
The anti-vaccination crowd has taken to the language of rationality to defend their points. They'll say, when you're talking science, they'll say, that's anti-science. When you give information, they'll say, that's misinformation. You're just literally putting the word "miss" in front of information. You haven't made a point.
You're misguided.
It's so you see, same thing with fake news. Like both sides, fake news it loses all meaning.
Alternative facts,
right?
Alternative. That makes me sad.
I think this comes back to flexible thought too. I really worry. Like I did a video on the ivermectin situation with Joe Rogan, right? And it's fear, right? People are afraid; they don't have control, right? They're paranoid about the government with the vaccines, and they don't want to take them, and they want to pretend that they have some other way to beat COVID, if they even believe COVID's real, which some of them don't,
right?
But they say it's like their belief is based on research, like they really believe they're doing research and finding that ivermectin is useful when it's right now at the time of making this video. There's no reason to believe it treats COVID.
No.
It has not been established. Could it? I mean, who knows what the future will find, but right now we have to go based on what we know from science, and it doesn't.
And
you must be misinformed.
Right, it's misinformation.
And ivermectin does have some use in humans for certain things.
Absolutely.
There's no evidence it has anything to do with COVID, but primarily it's used for large animals like horses and cows for gut stuff.
Right. It's a dewormer in those animals, and for humans it can treat lice and a few other things, but like head lice.
Yeah. It's bizarre to me. My girlfriend has a horse, and like she first brought this to my attention. Have you heard about all these people getting the ivermectin? I'm like, what's ivermectin? She's like, it's a horse dewormer. I'm like, why are people getting ivermectin? Like, she's like, because they think it helps treat COVID or protect them from COVID. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like, it's like you're making fun of me right now, right? Like you're like, that's not a thing. Like, no, this is really a thing. And I just keep hearing more and more about it. I'm just like, oh my goodness.
Wasn't it? There was another drug. Was it hydroxychloroquine?
Yeah.
I feel like we've been through this.
Like we've been through
It's
this.
deja vu all over again.
That was the anti-malaria one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I took that when I went over to Africa. And so I'm thinking of, it was disgusting. Like, it tastes so bad, if I remember correctly. And I can't imagine why anyone would think like, oh yeah, this will help me, I think, right? Everybody tells me it will. It tastes so bad. And like, it wasn't necessarily, you got to have some reason to get it too. Like so it's a lot of effort to go to for something that you're not even sure is going to help, right? There's no evidence of it. It's just kind of hearsay at that point.
Yeah. I think what they believe is evidence is the conspiratorial thinking, like the government's trying to suppress ivermectin research or something. And there's always one paper. And with ivermectin, that's true. There was a paper written, it was pre-publication, it was never actually published, it was a preprint. It got pulled before it got published, which means it never really was part of the record.
Right.
And it had plagiarized, the entire introduction was plagiarized. It had like made up dates, made up data, and yet people will still say, oh, that proves ivermectin. And it wasn't actually that strong in favor of ivermectin. That's the funny part, right? It wasn't like a smoking gun. And really, even if you have a positive result, a significant finding, you still have to have other research to corroborate that. So
there is a need for going to actual literature, published literature for things. I would say right now, I'm not anti-mask. I do believe currently in wearing masks. In March of 2020, though, when masks first started becoming a thing, there was no research at all on the effectiveness of cloth masks in preventing the transmission of COVID. None, because COVID was so new. They hadn't had an opportunity to do any research. Now, that research has since been done. But in March of 2020, I made a point to I made a Facebook post about this for all my friends and I only had like 100 or so. So, I made a point to say, like, look, there is no research that shows that cloth masks is effective for preventing the transmission. I'm still going to wear a mask in public because if it is effective, I want to be able to stop that. And it's not a big deal for me to cover my face while I'm in Wawa. Or, that's a convenience store here in the Delaware and Pennsylvania region for people who don't know.
kind of like a 7-Eleven.
Yeah, like a 7-Eleven.
Or Sheets.
Or Sheets.
Whatever else. They have...
Circle K.
Yeah, Quick or QT or something out Midwest, I think. Quick, something like that, yeah.
Anyway, I made the point of just saying, like, look, I'll still wear a mask because it doesn't impact me negatively in a way to do so. But until I see actual research that this is effective, I'm going to say, we don't know. And like I said, the research has since been done and shown that it's actually very, very effective at reducing the transmission of COVID-19.
You can't use the same argument, though, for the ivermectin, right? So wearing a mask, and people would argue this, but wearing a mask doesn't hurt you in any way. But people would say it limits your oxygen, whatever.
But ivermectin can.
Well, and that's exactly right. Like, it's not like, well, I'll just take ivermectin just to be on the safe side. Well, you're running a serious risk here, right? This is not something that's approved for that. And of course, there's medications that aren't approved for things we use them for. Okay. But you're running a serious risk here because there's no study that's done to verify that it's helpful. And there's very much a lot of reasons to believe it's going to be hurtful to you.
There's an overdose risk.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about a drug that's dosed in many different ways, like many different forms, tablets and pour on and injectable. And many of those are for horses and cows. Mm-hmm. So now if somebody finds one made for humans, that reduces the risk. You still have to use it as a physician prescribed. Right. But if somebody grabs the cow stuff...
And that's an important thing to note is because it is a prescription medication. It's not over the counter. You can't just walk into Rite Aid and say, hey, can I give some ivermectin? You can't do that. there are veterinary pharmacies you can, because for use with animals, it is over the counter.
Right.
Like you can just go in and like, I need the ivermectin for my horse. And that's what people have been doing. Like, they've been going and buying bulks of ivermectin and then like just having some real problems with it because it causes all sorts of gut issues in humans when taken too much. And so the overdoses people are seeing is, walking through Walmart and all of a sudden, ooh, where's the bathroom? I didn't make it.
Yeah. Drugs carry, almost all drugs carry a risk. Mm-hmm. And it's just, at this point, it's just a fantasy to believe it treats COVID. It's a fantasy. Yeah. So, maybe the future we'll see something else, or some other drug will be shown to be effective. I mean, the cure is always the goal, right? Vaccination is wonderful, and thank goodness we have them. They do seem to work very well. Mm-hmm. But a cure would be ideal, right? That you'd have a superior ability to stay alive with a cure. We don't have a cure.
An article I saw a headline on today said, as we're filming this, the day we filmed this, said that people who are unvaccinated are 11 times more likely to experience complications that could lead to death and require hospitalization than those who are vaccinated.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. I'm sorry, go ahead. I
was going to say, get vaccinated. There are very few reasons why you shouldn't. There are a couple of medical reasons, like being allergic to some of the suspension fluids that the vaccine is in. You don't want to take it if you have that allergy. Otherwise, get vaccinated. Consult your physician to make sure that it's okay for you, but get vaccinated.
Well, I was going to say very much so to your point, Mike, that there are certainly people that can't take the vaccine, right? And it's our job, those who can, to get vaccinated so we can help protect those people. So I have a friend who had a stroke, and there's some other complications there, and it was decided with a team of doctors that you probably shouldn't get the vaccine. There's some things in your medical history that there might be a complication there, right? And this is a huge risk if you do that. So that sucks, right? I mean, now you can't take something that's very effective against COVID, right? So then now it's our job, those who can, to have the vaccine, to get the vaccine, so that we can help those other people. And so, it's not just yourself you're looking out for, it's others around you. I have 2 young kids, and I can't imagine that the vaccine will ever be, anytime soon anyway, be approved for a 1-year-old, right? Or a 3-year-old, let alone. So, I'm in it to protect my kids too. You know what I mean? So there's other people around you who aren't at the same, don't have the same advantage that you do.
I do believe it has been approved for
like 12 and up.
Middle school and high school age.
Like age 12 and up, I think, yeah.
And some states are mandating that those age groups be vaccinated before returning to school.
Right.
So, I mean, it is important for everyone to do their part to try and get rid of this, because I hate the word COVID. At this point. It's just been around so long. Like I can't remember a time when we didn't have coronavirus in our lives.
The pre-corona. It was a magical time.
It was a magical time. We didn't have to worry about these things. I have a mask in my car that I have to carry with me because I work in essentially a clinic, and it's considered a healthcare facility. So if I'm in any of the public areas of that building, I have to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Because that's what the CDC guidelines are indicating. And it's not mandated by the state anymore, but it is something that our facility chooses to do. And I would love to get to a point where I don't have to keep that in my car anymore.
Right.
I could throw it away. And that means get vaccinated, please. For anybody who might be watching this who is on the fence about that, vaccination is the way to do things. I mean, there are many, many reports, anecdotal reports from nurses and hospital staff saying, like, we've got 90 people in the hospital right now who have complications from COVID. 89 of them were unvaccinated before they came in. The one who is vaccinated, he's going to go home tomorrow. The other 89 are probably not going to make it out of this hospital. And that's the point, I think, that is the most powerful point. That's why you get vaccinated.
Right. Yeah, I think, all the confusion, all the paranoia, people should remember that, math doesn't lie. It's just mathematics at this point. Yet people still get caught on statistics. Well, 11 times risk of death isn't too bad. Yeah, it is. That's a lot.
I mean, when the risk of death is only 0.05%, 11 times more isn't bad. But the risk of death being 5%, which is what it was in COVID, 11 times that is 55%.
Yeah, this is
That's a pretty significant jump.
significant. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So it's just math.
One of the things that there's nothing funny about ivermectin and all the things that are coming out and people taking it and all that, but you can always count on memes.
Yes, we can always count on memes.
So
Facebook
a
is-
picture of a horse, a thought bubble or a speech bubble above them, looking at someone saying, "Do I have to hide my ivermectin from you?" I mean, that can't be beat.
Oh, I think my favorite meme on this one, you wouldn't have gotten it because it's a Star Wars meme, of course.
You're right. I probably saw it, but
There's a bunch of the Star Wars meme that's going around. This one of my favorites now is Anakin and Padme. Like it's always a four comic or four bubble comic. So it's like Anakin says something and then Padme's like, "Oh, you mean like this, right?" And then it goes to his face, just kind of like stoic, and she's like, "Right." So this one was a horse replaced Padme, and it's like Anakin's like, "I bought some ivermectin, for me, right? For me, right?" it's like that's funny. Like that's hilarious. The whole ivermectin.
Is that the meme where they're on Naboo?
Yeah, so they're on Naboo meme. Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Can always count on memes.
Yeah,
They'll always be there for us.
They will. Going back to you said you went to Africa and you took the hydrochloroquine for that for malaria. That reminded me of a TV show from back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was one of my favorites called Connections. And it's just a series, like the host just goes through a series of steps connecting one thing to something completely different. And it's this weird roller coaster ride of how things are connected.
Like tangents?
Almost like tangents. It is almost like tangents. It's actually one of the reasons why it's one of my favorite shows. It was a great show. But in one of the episodes that I can remember, they actually talked about the invention of hydrochloroquine and how the invention of hydrochloroquine actually changed the liquor industry in the United States. Because in Africa, they were combining, because hydrochloroquine tastes horrible, they were combining it with gin. Like to dose people. And it's like you combine it with the gin or have a couple of shots of gin first and then combine it. And then it's not as bad. Because alcohol kills your taste buds for a little bit and you can get it down. And then went from like how the changes in the alcohol industry rippled out to other things. Just a great show. So it's a shame that it's not on anymore.
I definitely never saw that show.
No, it was a great show.
I don't think you're surprised that I never saw that show.
I'm not.
You didn't even acknowledge it. That's how unsurprised you were.
No, this is my surprise show. I really like. Very few people have heard of that show.
Yeah,
it was a really great show. Though I think there's still some episodes up on YouTube or something. If you could do a deep dive into YouTube,
Like all good shows, it gets canceled, right?
Yeah.
So moving back to this case, we see that ultimately Shayna was found guilty the second time as well, and sentenced to life, but she can be released as early as 2032. Yeah. So still an incredibly favorable possibility. Although this is a life sentence this time. So the presumption when somebody gets sentenced to life in prison is that they'll die in prison, even if they're eligible for parole.
And if they're eligible, if she's eligible, she is eligible for parole. But we said in other cases, parole boards want to see contrition and remorse for what happened. And so far, Shayna has not shown that at all. And especially with some of the statements about like I have an Einstein level IQ, like I'm going to get away with this. That's not remorse. And the parole boards are going to really need to see something heavy from her.
She's in a tough position. It would seem like she should just own what she actually did. I don't know if her appeals are exhausted, but if they're exhausted, I wonder if she hasn't been told just to own it, to try to get parole when that time comes. But usually they like to see like some years of pro-social behavior and remorse. So she's in a tough spot.
She is.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that she's not like Betty Broderick or Betty. She's never going to show remorse because I don't think she has any. I think she really believes she's justified. I'm not sure whether Shane is the same.
Well, she has a long time to think about it, I guess. So
She does.
maybe she'll wise up and get released someday. A little scary. So speaking of scary, let's look at things from Ryan's perspective. I always like to look at the victim and think, what could the victim have done differently? Not to blame him for what happened. Clearly, he wasn't at fault. She shot him to death.
Right.
But is there anything he could have done to mitigate his risk, to try to stay safe? Like, what do you do if you're in a relationship with somebody like Shayna Hubers?
Lock up your firearm?
Yeah. So
Arguably, I understand it was his habit to come home and take his gun and put it on the table. But to be honest, like, that's gun safety number one. You don't leave a loaded weapon just sitting out, even if it's your concealed carry. You get a lock cabinet, you walk in, you unlock the cabinet, put it in there, lock it again. She wouldn't have been able to just grab it off the table and shoot him with it if it had been locked up somewhere. That's a mitigation of risk.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he had a concealed carry, and he carried around, I believe it was a Sig Sauer P3, Sig Sauer P238. Right, so this was chambered in 380 ACP. So it's a curious caliber. It's a pretty common concealed carry caliber. It's on kind of the weaker side, usually for inexperienced shooters or people without a tremendous amount of hand strength, or people who like to practice a lot and they're simply tired of the kick of a 9mm and a tiny gun. But there's a debate about whether the 380 ACP is really an ideal self-defense round. Like, the minimum is usually considered 9mm. Clearly, it was effective in killing him. And any gun can be dangerous. The question is, like, ideal. Like, you're in a dark alley, somebody threatens you, they shoot at you, they try to lunge at you with a knife. You want to be able to defend yourself with something you know is going to have pretty good effect. The 380 is considered a balance. Again, minimum self-defense round, but very little kick. A very controllable weapon. Shayna apparently controlled it pretty well herself. I believe his model was equipped with a safety.
It was.
Which Sig Sauers can have. They often make models that don't have them, and that do. You can buy either one. I think usually it's like $30 more to get with a safety.
Yeah. Usually, I think it's regulations in some states that they must have safety. So you can't, in certain states, you can't buy one that doesn't have a safety on it.
Yeah, safeties they're a contentious issue, right? Law enforcement almost universally says safeties are bad. And private gun owners tend to be more split on the issue of safety. And I think it's because the way the gun is used, like law enforcement is used to carrying a weapon in an external holster. Well, then there's no point in having a safety because the trigger's shrouded. So a safety is only going to get you killed because when you try to grab the gun, you're going to forget about it and you're not going to be able to pull the trigger. But many private citizens carry a gun in their pocket, right? Where you have a trigger snag risk, keys, change, pocket knife, something like that. Yeah. Your finger if you're not paying attention. Right. So the safety gives you one extra layer of protection, but you have to remember to disengage it after you draw. So you have to practice that way.
I mean, there is something to be said for officers practicing immediately taking the safety off as as they draw or after they draw, once it's out of, I think, if you do that every time, it becomes an automatic part of that movement. And then it's not an issue. But a lot of guns have multiple safeties, and safety switches are, I think, what we're talking about, because some of the weapons have both a trigger and dovetail safety, which means there has to be pressure on the from here into the handle,
back of the grip,
the back of the grip, and then it has to be a deliberate amount of pressure placed on a specific portion of the trigger in order to allow the trigger to be pulled, which is two multiple safety options, and to have then a safety switch that you also have to flip, I think, is what the officers are having an issue with. Because if I have to have pressure on two opposite sides of the trigger in order to be able to pull it and have it go off, and it's in my holster, that's never going to go off.
Well, most guns sold to law enforcement have zero safeties, right? Like that's why I think the Glock is so well regarded with law enforcement, because Glocks have zero safeties. They have a little thing in the trigger which prevents, it reduces the risk of trigger snag. It's like this piece of plastic in the middle that your finger has to your finger catches as you're mounting the trigger. Also, if you drop the weapon, in theory, the trigger won't be carried into a discharge position.
And they often are hammerless as well.
They use a striker, yeah.
They use a striker.
Yeah, so Glocks are very clean. That's why I think law enforcement likes them. You have them an external hard plastic holster, you pull them out, you pull the trigger, that's it. You don't have to worry about a hammer getting snagged, safety. Oh, I forgot to turn the safety off. And they're fairly reliable.
The most popular handgun for law enforcement in the state of Delaware is actually the Smith & Wesson 40.
They use that. I know they use the SIG Sauer in Delaware.
They have, but the officers get a choice.
Oh, okay.
And so many of them prefer the Smith & Wesson 40. And that has a dovetail safety.
That has the safety. Yeah.
It has the dovetail safety and a trigger safety. I know, I own one. It was actually my first gun.
Yeah,
First one that I bought.
Smith & Wesson, they make good guns. I've really come to like SIG Sauer as well. I'm still not a huge fan of Glock. I don't know, for a personal carry, for a civilian, I like the safety. Right? So to me, it makes sense because you're at risk of trigger snagging, a greater risk without a safety.
I don't have any reason to personally carry. I mean, my cousin asks me all the time, "Are you going to get your concealed carry?" I'm like, no, because it doesn't make much sense for me. I don't go very many places where I would be comfortable having a firearm on me in a concealed position. I definitely wouldn't want to go into my offices and being a counselor and have a firearm on me. I have never had a client get physical enough that I felt that I was in danger. We do have panic buttons in all of our therapy rooms. And I think that if I had one on me and somebody noticed it, that could cause an issue.
Yeah, that can hurt rapport.
Yeah. But it's important not to let somebody notice. That's your advantage.
Right.
Well,
that's the advantage of that. But I go from my office, I go from my home to my office, back to my home, and then up to a barn where there's a horses. And I don't see any reason for me to carry. And if I had to carry, I'd just leave the gun in the car when I go into my office. I don't see any reason for me personally to have it. But I do own a few guns, and I have them, and I prefer to have the safety. Mm-hmm. Again, it's a safety issue for having them around my house.
I've seen these horror stories with trigger snags before, where, especially with leather holsters. That's why I think the hard plastic make more sense, because they don't ever deform unless you really abuse them. But leather will eventually deform and can creep into the trigger area. And if somebody's not paying attention and they're reholstering, they push down real hard, which you should never do. If the gun's resisting, find out why. Don't keep pushing, because that means the trigger might be depressing. You see these nightmare situations where the gun accidentally discharges, sends a bullet right down somebody's leg, which can be fatal.
Yeah.
Often it isn't in the pictures I've seen, but it can be. And of course, it could ricochet, it could fire into somebody else. There's a lot of danger there. And realistically, if you carry, the chance you have to use it is pretty minimal. So you have to weigh that risk, like the chances of a trigger snag versus having to use it. And if you did have to use it, you just have to make sure that you're trained to take the safety off.
Yeah. If I ever got a holster, if I ever needed to get a holster, it would be for cowboy action shooting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cowboy action, absolutely.
I do. I've got the rifle, I've got the shotgun that I need. I just need the revolver, then I could do some cowboy action shooting.
I can picture you, Mike, just sitting there stereotypical, just pulling the pulling it back,
just doing the fan.
Yeah. I can picture that.
There's no evidence that anyone ever actually did that in the Old West. It's actually a very unsafe thing to do. There's another case we should cover that has fanning as one of the major components. It's called the Bugs Bunny case, the Bugs Bunny defense. Oh man, that's a wild case. A woman shot her husband. Her contention is that she was trying to demonstrate fanning and didn't know the gun was loaded. But it's a double action weapon, which
you don't fan those.
You don't fan those because you don't need to.
Yeah.
Fanning just is with a single action weapon. That means that you have to pull the hammer back and then pull the trigger.
I think you actually hold the trigger engaged position for fanning.
Well, with a single action weapon, it's one action then followed by another, which is why it's single action. So you pull the hammer back and then pull the trigger to fire. With fanning, you just hold the trigger back and then just smack the hammer to fire rapidly. A double action weapon actually, is when you pull the trigger and the hammer comes back. This is all with revolvers, by the way.
Right.
A double action, you pull the trigger and the hammer comes back, cocks itself, and then releases and fires. And it doesn't, the mechanism doesn't go back into place until you release the trigger.
Right.
So if you just pull it back and try and fan the hammer, it's not going to move.
I think you can.
There are ways of doing like
Yeah.
a multiple step where you like are quickly kind of moving back and forth to try and do it, but it's slower. And why would you bother when you can just repeatedly pull the trigger?
Yeah. Yeah. With a double action, I mean, that was the big advance was, you could just pull the trigger, it would rotate the cylinder and draw the hammer back, release it at the end of the throw. And it was a lot better than single action. Although there's something still, I think, special about shooting a single action revolver. They're works of art.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they're really safe if you get one that has that, like a transfer bar or something where, you can't hit it. Old single actions, you could hit the back of the hammer and it would go off, right? It was a big risk. But the newer design, I mean, it won't fire. So they're really safe because you have to pull the hammer back. Like they're not going to go off by accident.
So I don't own any guns, and I don't really have a desire to. I don't have anything against guns, but it's not anything that I really interests me. And so it's interesting, fascinating when you guys talk about it. You obviously both know a lot about it, and I can also understand somebody's perspective of wanting one. Not only for self-defense, but maybe just target practice or hunting, or sport, whatever. But I can understand the thought process of, I'm sure many people, of, I feel like maybe I should get a firearm for potential self-defense or to have it at my house should I ever need it for self-defense. So I can understand the thought process there. And that's a pretty scary thought, to think, what if I ever needed to use this, whether I'm carrying it on me, whether it's at my house or whatever. And it's, it's amazing then that somebody like Ryan, who gun enthusiast, had a lot of guns, would just leave them about, right? Leave bullets about, leave loaded guns about and things like that, especially given that there's indication that he was scared of Shayna, that he was like kind of worried she was going to do something to him. Now, she came over to his place unexpected. I think she had a key to his place, if I remember correctly. So she could have come in there and he may not have really realized it, may not have thought about the gun. But still, it really speaks to you should be safe about it, right? Okay, so he's used to just putting it on the table, but there's got to be something you're thinking about here. How am I going to protect myself from somebody else using this gun, right? Whether I keep it on me,
Right, that's the key.
or whether I keep it in a case or like a safe or something like that, and I've never researched guns, but I get ads all the time for gun safes, and it sounds like there's some pretty cool stuff out there with a lot of protection where you can keep it from people you don't want to have it, but you can pretty easily access it with different combinations or different
Or even
methods.
fingerprints.
Yeah,
Fingerprints, sure.
fingerprints.
Yeah.
I've got one that does fingerprints and has a 4-button combination pattern, and it's a quick open.
Yeah.
Like I can I had 4 buttons and the thing opens up. I can put it in, just it's spring loaded lid, and put the thing in there and close it. If Ryan had something like that, maybe on his kitchen table, you just walk over, doot, 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 put it in, close it, and then it's safe. It's not out there. I mean, he can pull it out if he needs to clean it or whatnot. But I am of the opinion that everyone should at least try firing a weapon, firing a firearm at least once in their life. It's not for everybody, but until you have had that experience, it's hard to gauge what that experience is.
Yeah.
And not firing at anything other than paper. That's what I shoot at mostly, is paper targets.
How many papers have you killed?
Many
Many
pieces of
zombie
paper.
pictures or bad guy pictures.
Although I will say my actual absolute favorite thing to shoot at is actually steel. And I didn't know that until last Memorial Day. I bought my dad a Father's Day / birthday present that was a set of hanging steel targets. He has 13 acres of land down in North Carolina, and he can shoot guns on it all day long, and nobody's going to say boo about it. Here in Delaware, if you
Yeah, there's no place.
there's no, you have to go to a range specifically. But on his land, 13 acres, he can shoot, and he's got a perfect place to do it. He just never had anything to shoot at, so I got the steel targets, and it's just great because like they hang at an angle, so if the bullet hits, it ricochets straight down into the ground, which is wonderful. And it's just great to just like aim and fire, and you hear the bang of the gun, and then just ping, on the steel, and it's just a wonderful feeling to know hey, it's an instant gratification. I hit the target I was aiming at.
You don't have to wonder if you hit the paper target because there's no audio feedback from that.
Right. There is no audio feedback from hitting paper, and if it's at a certain distance, you can't even really tell through your scope or through binoculars whether you hit it. You have to go up and be like, okay, and especially if you're using a small round like a 22, and you get 22 at 100 yards on a piece of paper. Maybe I hit it. I don't know until I get up there and I can actually see. But if you're aiming at a steel target, you get that pink, and you can hear it, and it's great. But I think that it just is for target stuff. Like that's what I think everyone should have that experience just at least once to see if it's something that is interesting for them, or just to gain an appreciation for what it's like. There are far too many people who just go, no, guns are bad, period, done. End of discussion. And and that doesn't give them a proper respect for the weapon. It is a weapon.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think one of the keys in this case is that, Ryan wanted to carry a gun. He selected one that's somewhat common for, again, mostly inexperienced shooters, but, there's plenty of people who carry 380s who choose that because they really like that caliber. You have to, I think, be a little more concerned with shot placement with a 380, but either way, I mean, it's a common carry weapon, but he forgot some of the basic rules of firearm safety, right? Don't let anyone know you're carrying, because that's your whole advantage. That's the whole idea of carrying concealed. So, if somebody comes up and threatening you, you don't want them to know you have the gun. When it comes out, you want that to be a surprise, right? He certainly shouldn't have told Shayna, who had a history of unstable behavior, erratic moods. And then to put the gun down in an area where she could reach it, that makes no sense. He certainly, not that he was asking for it, but he took a lot of chances. He should have just kept it concealed. But that's it. I mean, there was no reason to expose it.
But that was his habit. It was also, his home, his sanctuary, his place of being. When he got home, there's no reason to be carrying his weapon at home, so he takes it out, puts it on the dining room table. I can understand that. I can also understand he was very intimate with Shayna, and she was, there for. She wasn't living with him, but she was there enough that he felt comfortable with her at a certain point in their relationship. So he took it out and put it. He would take it out and put it down in front of her. It didn't. I don't think it ever really occurred to him at that time that I need to be keeping this a secret from my girlfriend.
Mm-hmm. Or at least locked away.
Or at least but I think that keeping it locked away is for the safety of everyone.
Yeah.
At no point in the history of firearms has a firearm jumped up and shot someone.
No matter what some people say, right?
Never happened. It has never happened. There have been occasions where someone has dropped a firearm that was loaded and it's gone off. But that was, again, somebody tried to pick it up and move it and dropped it.
Almost all older firearms, newer ones, one in probably a billion chance that would happen with the new safeties.
Right. But locking up your firearm is a way of eliminating the human error involved. Mm-hmm. A gun in a locked cabinet or a small portable gun safe.
Even a trigger lock would have been.
Even a trigger lock or a barrel lock. Mm-hmm. Any of those things. And Ryan Poston would likely still be alive.
Probably.
Although there are knives.
Right, there and other weapons.
And we saw Travis was stabbed a number of times and had his throat slit. So
and shot.
But he was also shot.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, moving past the gun component and looking at Ryan, it really is the judgment of staying involved with somebody who is essentially a stalker. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing applies to Travis Alexander. Yeah. He had many chances to disengage safely. I'm sure Ryan did too, but he didn't. He endured 50,000 messages coming his way. He should have realized that wasn't healthy. He probably didn't. He probably did realize it, but didn't know it would be fatal.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the last words he spoke to the woman that he worked with was, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine." Mm-hmm. I don't think it occurred to him that his life was in danger from Shayna. I think if at most he was worried that there might be some physical harm, or some legal action that would occur. Yeah, maybe he was afraid, like, she'll slash my tires and try and smash into my apartment. I'll have to call the cops and get involved in a criminal. I don't think he ever really thought, wow, Shayna Hubers could murder me.
Yeah, sadly, it is something that should occur to people.
And I'm sure we all know maybe many people, or maybe at least some, that are in a very similar situation where they have a relationship, they're in a relationship that's toxic, and whether they realize it or not, they're not doing anything about it, right? They're staying in this relationship, maintaining the same pattern of, we're on and off again, and, one day I hate this person, the next day I love this person, and we said it before that all you see at that point is the times where you love this person, the time when it's so great. But the times that you hate this person, all right, we can move on from this. Or you're not even thinking about it really. You're going with it, right? Because I'm going to get back to the good times. And so it's absolutely necessary for all of us in every situation probably, but especially a situation in a relationship, to step back and think, what are my friends saying about this? What's my family saying about this? Am I under a lot of distress because of this? Is this actually healthy for me to be engaging in? Is this actually something that I should be doing at all? And not just thinking, well, we love each other, we care about each other, intimacy's great, whatever you're thinking about, but really take a good hard look at it. You could say the same thing for a job. You could say the same thing for, I don't know, I'm sure many other things. You got to stop. At some point, you need to realize, I need to stop discounting all these negative things and only looking at the positive, and realizing if I make a change, it might be stressful for a while. It might not feel good for a while, but maybe that's worth it, right? Maybe it's worth it for me to take a step, do something different, even though it may be distressing or painful or make me sad for a little bit, because am I going to be better off ultimately? And unfortunately, you should really look at yourself at that point. It's not about the other person. It's about, I need to take care of myself. Most of these don't end up in murder. But if you're experiencing distress as a result of a relationship, you got to step back. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people learn the hard way, but there are those some that learn it, realize, all right, I got to step back. I got to get away from this person. And I think that's probably where friends come in and really try to guide someone. Therapists would be really helpful for that. Parents would be really helpful for that. So using your resources, right? Using the people that care about you professionally and personally, and taking what they say and accepting it and realizing maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I should make a change.
With him, go ahead, man.
I was going to say, I think that's kind of the secret to therapy. Shh, don't tell anybody. It's, if there's distress, try to find insight and awareness of it. Because change can't happen until you take stock of things. It speaks very much to what you were saying. Like, if you're in distress from anything, from a relationship, from depression, from substance use issues, finding a way to step back from that, finding a way to try and look at it, examine it, find awareness of where are things going wrong, is how you ultimately end up making change. That's the secret to therapy. That's what I do. That's what we all do, is try and help people find that insight, find that change, that awareness, so that they can do the change. I always tell my clients, you do the hard part. I see my client for an hour a week. That's it. That's not the hard work.
I frequently say, I really didn't do anything here. I helped guide, but you're the one who did it, right? I mean, I can't force you to do anything you don't want to do. I can't force you to break up with anybody. I can't force you to take a harder look at this relationship if you don't want to. You're the one who did this. And that's very significant to point out, right? Is that you're the one who takes all the effort in this. I'm just the bystander here. I'm trying to help guide in any way I can. And so you're right, Mike. I mean, that's where what we do is essential, right? What we do is very important for many people's lives. But it's all about what they're going to ultimately do for themselves. And whatever role I can play in that, perfect.
Lord knows there are times when I've had clients where I would like to be like, you need to break up. And I've said, this doesn't seem like a healthy relationship. Are you sure this is what you want to continue doing? I've tried to point out, it's like, look, this is unhealthy, 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 unhealthy. These are all the unhealthy things that are going on in this relationship. What do you think is the best thing to do? I should probably break up with them. Well, sounds like that's a healthier maneuver.
Sounds reasonable to me.
Sounds reasonable to me. You're the one who came up with that conclusion. I only helped you get there. And then they come back the next week. So I'm still having problems with my ex. Like, did you try and break up with him? No. Okay, you need to break up. They need to move to California. You stay here. Do not contact each other anymore. Yeah. That's my prescription. But I can't really say that. But it's the truth. Like, we don't do. There's no magic to therapy. It's hard work on the part of the client. They do everything.
Yeah.
Well, I think the breaking up here really was the key. So, like, we talk about borderline personality disorder, and people might say, well, it comes with some danger, but it's not so dangerous that you should live in fear all the time, which is true. Like, if you're in a relationship with somebody borderline, chances are they're not going to kill you. That's an unexpected result. But one of the more dangerous times would be breakup. That would be a time where you'd want to be more careful with somebody with or without a disorder. Wouldn't have to be borderline. Breaking up is more hazardous. Yeah. So, Ryan didn't protect himself during what he knew should have been a stressful time, or maybe he didn't know. To
go to the gun metaphor, living with a gun is pretty safe thing to do until your finger gets near the trigger. Right. That breakup time is when your finger's near the trigger. Mm-hmm. Like, you got to be careful at that point where you're aiming things and what you're doing with the weapon. Yeah. With borderline personality disorder, it's sure you can live with it. You can live with the person. Everything seems, might be a little bit chaotic, but there are plenty of people who find ways to live with it.
Yeah, and without getting murdered.
Without getting murdered, mm-hmm. and people have generally happy relationships with borderline personality disorder. In the mix. Sometimes they have to go to therapy.
It's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
Yeah,
it is certainly a challenge, but they managed to make it work. But if you're going to break up, that's the danger time. That is the danger zone. And maybe the danger zone is a golf club to the windshield, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But it also might be, like in this case, a trigger pulled and someone ends up dead, which is unfortunate. But that's the rarity, the rare occasion.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, it's fairly rare. I think people just need to kind of be aware of when the risk is higher. And really if somebody has trouble regulating their mood, access to weapons is not their friend. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't matter if it's a baseball bat or whatever, it's not a great idea. Yeah. They're more likely to hurt themselves or someone else than actually use it in self-defense. With erratic mood, not with person in general. So another thing I think of with Ryan, and I don't know if this is something he did or not, but something I've seen a lot with people who are in relationships with others with borderline, is the way they calculate the kind of the average good times of the relationship is very odd, right? They'll say, well, usually things are good. And the way I like to think about it is, what kind of climate do you want to live in? Right? Like, a lot of people say, well, 70 degrees year round, right?
That'd be nice.
Yeah. So then you'd have to know, well, okay, if I'm going to average 70 degrees, I have to look at the temperatures each day. You're going to have like a typical low of 60, a typical high of 80. That seems pretty good. Yeah. With borderline, it's like a typical low of 20, right? And a typical high of 120. Yeah, you're going to average 70, but you're going to be pretty miserable most of the time. So sometimes, it's just, okay, maybe, I've actually got out pieces of paper before and said, let's add up, here's a calendar. Let's draw a little calendar, if I have a calendar. Mark the good days and the bad days. Let's see what it looks like in this relationship. You do the same thing with somebody's employer. Like, how do you like your job? Okay, mark good days and bad days, just as one system. And yeah, their average is okay, but they're at the extremes.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah, so maybe Ryan was having a good time on average.
for some of it, I'm sure.
Well, and the thing about borderline too is when somebody with that disorder is attracted to somebody else, usually there's a lot of passion during that phase. The idealization phase is more than just a lot of sex. It's idealization. Like, they really think you're a perfect person. Mm-hmm. Like, and maybe that, again, I don't know about the case of Ryan, but maybe for some people that helps a part of their ego or reinforces what they already believe about themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it can.
Yeah. It's alluring. It's attractive. And it shouldn't be, because it's destructive.
Yeah.
No one's perfect. Somebody's idealizing you. That's bad. That's going to end badly because the other side of the coin will flip over.
So as we wrap up this case, I do want to put this out there for comments. I'm thinking about doing either a ballerina for Shayna's pirouetting in the interrogation room, or a gavel to represent Ryan being a lawyer, and the final justice ultimately in the case.
I think I know which ones people will pick, but let's see how the votes go.
I'd like to see how the votes go. Like so gavel or ballerina.
And you're still looking for a name for?
We are still looking for a
lizard.
name for our lizard. So we have Larry the alien over there, and our lizard still doesn't have a name.
All right. So multiple things to add into the comments.
Yeah. So please let us know about that. Let's go to final thoughts before we wrap up. I'll start with you, Jeff.
Well, I think probably the most important thing here is what we were just talking about. What do you do in a situation like this? And we've talked about it in other cases as well, that somebody gets blinded by the good times, right? And the average, you just talked about that, Dr. Grande. And I don't know, I guess I would just revert back to what we were talking about with, you have to step back and take an honest look at what you're doing in many different situations. And that's, I think that's why having a third party is so important. So doing something like counseling, because, if you ask a parent, you're gonna take their advice, sure, but it may not weigh very much on you, right? And you may not even listen to that person. If you're gonna ask a friend, sure, you're gonna listen to them, but it may not weigh that heavily on you, right? Like it may just be like, yeah, you're right, but whatever. It's not a big deal. You maybe don't know what you're talking about or whatever. You don't know our relationship. But if you have a third party, somebody who has no reason to be on either side and to just advocate for the well-being of that person, I think that often carries a little bit more weight. So obviously I'm biased. I think people should be engaged in counseling, but I think that would be very helpful for a situation like that, just to get an honest, unbiased look at the situation in which you're in. Not even just with a relationship, but with a job or with any given situation you're in. It helps to have some kind of guidance or some kind of input from somebody else. And we're highly trained to do just that, to understand the patterns that we see and be able to offer something, whether it be, maybe there's an alternative you need to look at, or just some kind of maybe here's something that you look at in your own life, kind of be more self-aware. So that could have been helpful in this case. I'm not aware that Ryan engaged in any counseling. I didn't hear anything about it. I think that person probably would have testified if so. So yeah.
Yeah, objectivity is more valuable than people think. Right? So, and anybody who wonders about that, just consider being accused of hurting somebody, and you go to court, and the judge is that person's father. Nobody would like that.
Yeah.
People would realize right away, objectivity is valuable.
Yeah.
So, and counselors, even though not perfectly objective, bring a lot more than family members, friends, classmates, coworkers. Yep. Very good. Thanks, Jeff. Mike, what are your thoughts?
So, my biggest thoughts on this particular case, as I've watched like the 2020s, the 48 hours. Like I've watched like everything about this case, and I've done a lot of reading and articles and things. And the things that struck me most is that Shayna, she may not have had an Einstein level IQ, but she was incredibly intelligent. Mm-hmm. She had some ambition. She had some drive. She really could have made something of herself. She was very, very intelligent. And it just really strikes me that some people, despite how much intelligence they might have at their disposal, they can still do some really stupid things. And I'm not just talking about, like, I'm not specifically even saying murdering Ryan Poston, although that's not the most intelligent thing to do. I think that was more driven by passion and driven by anger and the idea of rejection and that he was moving on to somebody else. I think there was a lot of that driven in there. It was like the aftermath of that. If she had, with the 911 call, she called, she said these things about self-defense. She got to the police station and said, I want an attorney. Those are all intelligent things. If she had stopped there, if she had done the step number one, don't say anything. She had reserved her right to remain silent. I think she might have had a much different chance of changing the outcome of this case. She might have been able to actually convince people that there was some abuse, or that there was some danger to her life at that point. But the fact that she kept talking, that was her doing something stupid. And then the pirouetting around when nobody was there, that was doing something stupid. And I did it. Oh yes, I did it. Like singing a song about how you did this and singing Amazing Grace. Like all of that was objectively stupid to do in that place. If you want to sing that song, save it for when you're in your own apartment or your own bathroom or your own shower where you're pretty sure there's no cameras and microphones. Not in a police interrogation chamber where you're pretty sure there probably is.
Assume anytime police are around or you're near their property, like their buildings, you're being recorded.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the changes and some of the changes in trial strategy and some of the things she did, like she at her sentencing here in the second trial, she went on and was on the stand, and she, much like Jodi Arias, was very contentious with the prosecutor. Was very, very just combative back and forth. And again, the jury sees that, and they're not thinking, "Oh, well, this person is innocent and fighting for their life." They think, "Oh, wow, this person thinks that they're going to get one over if they just show enough anger." Like, wow, that's really an angry person, a really passionate person. In a situation where passion happened and killed somebody, and she's arguing with the prosecutor at this point. Like, yeah, we can see why, how this happened in the first place. So
yeah,
we give the maximum penalty. And again, like she's, I still think she's incredibly intelligent. I think she really could have had a great career ahead of her if this hadn't happened. But in the aftermath of things, she just did not use any of that intelligence she had. She thought she was using it, but she really wasn't.
I guess there's a big difference between having it and applying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she possessed it, technically.
She had all of it still in its original packaging because she never used it.
Unblemished. It would
waiting
get
for a return or something.
High rating if she was trying to auction it, right? Like like baseball cards and stuff.
Like new or near mint. 180 IQ, near mint.
Barely used. Yeah. So I think with this case, this is one of those situations where, clearly again, Ryan was the victim, but we always have to think about what could he have done, and it was all about recognizing how borderline can be dangerous, or whatever he would have called the symptoms. He wouldn't know when it was borderline, but
sure.
There was a lot of, to me, what stood out was a lot of boundary crossing. He did know that was happening, and yet he really, he kept letting her come back, and didn't recognize those boundary crossings as dangerous. And I think that's a key mistake. If somebody keeps crossing your boundaries, they're inappropriate repeatedly, that's a red flag that can't really be ignored. It may not lead to murder, but it's going to lead to something bad.
Right.
I think from the point of view of Shayna, obviously she doesn't have much insight, so it's hard to say, well, she should have recognized this or that. Borderline is a disorder of, characterized by lack of insight, like all personality disorders. But she should have realized, if she could have, that when rejection is no longer an option, that's a dangerous situation. Like if she was not going to accept being rejected, that's not good. Relationships always have to be optional. As sad as that is, like people married a long time, they don't want to contemplate that. It can happen. I've seen couples married 40, 50 years where one just walks out. Just one day, I didn't really love him this whole time.
I was just waiting for the kids to be off at college.
That's right.
Now they are. I'm out. Later.
Yep. Yeah, and it actually happens more often than people think.
Oh, the empty nest divorce is actually pretty common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like we stayed together for the kids, and now that they're all off at college and we don't have any kids at home anymore, we're done.
I think I was reading about this with the divorce of Bill Gates and Melinda Gates.
Yeah.
which is a recent high-profile example. I think it's called gray divorce in the research literature when I was studying that, and it's surprisingly common. Yeah.
You hear people say that, like, oh, we found out we don't really have anything in common anymore. It used to be the kids, and now we're like, well, what are we supposed to do with each other? We don't even know each other anymore. The kids have always been our focus, and if you're not, in some cases, if you're not maintaining a relationship separate from whatever else you're focusing on, whether it be kids or career or whatever else, then yeah, you run a pretty great risk of having that happen.
I think that is the point of maintaining the relationship. Maintaining the relationship means maintaining some intimacy and intimate connection in knowing each other. Relationships that tend to last, the 50-year marriages, tend to last because people tend to keep in touch with each other.
Yeah.
Or they end up just living together and just like we've got my own separate lives. But the ones like I've seen the ones, my parents have been married for 50 years. This past year was their 50th anniversary.
Nice.
Great. And there are times you can just look and see like they still have that connection.
Nice.
Which is great and wonderful. But others like, oh, we've been married for 50 years. Why? Because I don't have any other place to go.
It's pretty common.
And they don't know each other anymore because they haven't been maintaining the relationship. And that's a constant effort, something that has to be done all the time to try and maintain. Do I still know this person that I'm living with?
When I was a teenager, there's a guy that I was working with. He was on his third marriage, and his advice to me, well, he was talking about him and his wife, who were maybe married 6 months or a year at that point. He said, well, I got my TV on this side of the house. She's got her TV on this side of the house. Separate bank accounts. I don't know what she makes. She doesn't know what I make. That's the way it should be. And so, I'm a teenager.
Is that the way it was in your second marriage?
Right. Like, was this first, second, or third marriage? Like, what define this? So, I don't really care what he said in reality, but I'm sitting there thinking, like, am I supposed to be listening? Like, am I supposed to like take this and apply it to my life? Like to maybe a first, second, or third marriage? Is that like, which one should I apply it to? And which one is it going to be successful? Like you're obviously not the best person to give advice.
Definitely the third. Definitely the third. No,
messed it up in the first two, but third, get it right with separate TVs.
A friend of mine years ago once said like, young men often go to the most experienced of their friends for advice on how to deal with women, but the most experienced person is the one who's had the most relationships, right? Why do you go to the person who fails the most in order to get advice for what to do? Find the one who has had one relationship for several years and talk to that guy, because that guy will tell you how to stay in a relationship.
Yeah. I've worked with a lot of people going into multiple marriages, even up to 6 and 7. And they have something in common, right? When you're talking to them, like before whatever marriage, like the next one, 5, 6, 7, whatever, they're like, oh no, I figured it out. I didn't have it with number 1, didn't have it with number 2, number 3, I don't want to talk about. Number 4, I didn't figure it out. I know now for 5, 6, whatever. I know it was this one thing. And I'm like, I don't know. Is it really one thing? Right? Are you sure you've done a root cause analysis here?
Doc, I'm getting married again. It's my 6th marriage. I'm marrying wife number 3 again.
That's what I was missing. Going back. I got to go back to number 3 because I finally figured that thing out. I'm going to give her a chance. You imagine the family structure of that. Like, at what point do kids, are they half siblings and step siblings? But wait, I'm back with, my mom's married to him again. But no, wait, my stepmom. Oh no, I don't know what I'm doing now. There's so much confusion.
At that point, the adult kids just go like, when you figure it out, let me know. Like I'm.
One of the most confusing things is marrying the same person again. I think for a small percentage of the population that probably makes sense, but I've never seen it end well in my experience. I'm sure it has. Yeah. But and often, both people have been busy in the meantime, like with another marriage or having kids or whatever. So it's complex. But yeah, I mean, who knows? But either way, just some thoughts on.
As long as it doesn't end in murder, though, I think it works out.
It's a good standard. If there's no murder part, then. So those are our that's our analysis of Shayna Hubers, this case. Interesting case, Jody Arias too, to be sure.
And in this case, there is a murder part.
That's right,
and that's this show, the murder part.
The murder part. So please put any comments. Mike talked before about some comment requests for different items.
The ballerina or the gavel.
And the name of the lizard.
Yeah, and the name of the lizard, yeah.
As well, if you have any ideas for future episodes, let us know. Any thoughts on this? We read every comment. We're happy to see them. We will be back pretty soon with another murder part. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.